The year is 1751, and in a quiet corner of Virginia, a child is born who will come to shape the future of a new nation. James Madison, a figure whose name is synonymous with the foundations of the United States, began his journey in the midst of an age of transformation. In a world defined by the ebb and flow of British colonial rule, the stirrings of revolution would soon alter the course of history, and Madison, though a quiet and thoughtful man, would become a central architect in the creation of a new government. From his early years in the wilderness of Virginia to his pivotal role in the drafting of the United States Constitution, Madison's path was shaped by a deep belief in the power of ideas and the strength of a well-constructed republic. His intellectual curiosity, his ability to navigate the complexities of politics, and his unwavering commitment to the ideals of liberty would lead him through the trials of war, the struggles of national identity, and the forging of a government that endures to this day. As we reflect on the life of James Madison, we journey through the quiet moments of history, unhurried and gentle, as he helps shape a nation destined for greatness. James Madison was born on March 16, 1751, in Port Conway, Virginia, to James Madison Sr. and Nellie Conway Madison. He was the eldest of 12 children, though not all would survive into adulthood. His early years were spent in the lush green countryside of Virginia, amidst the rolling hills of what would later become a proud and storied estate known as Montpelier. Yet despite the familial and geographical importance of his home, Madison's youth was marked by a quiet solitude. His health, delicate from an early age, would often keep him isolated from the lively play and games of other children. Instead, he spent much of his time in the company of books, a habit that would define his entire life. His father, a prosperous plantation owner, had a significant influence on Madison's upbringing, ensuring that his son received the finest education available at the time. Young James was tutored at home, studying Latin, Greek, mathematics, and the classics of European thought. His intellectual pursuits were not merely encouraged, but were actively fostered by his family, who valued education highly. Yet it was not just the textbooks that shaped Madison's world. His mother, Nellie, provided a steady hand in the shaping of his moral and ethical development, imparting a sense of purpose and duty that would guide him through the challenges of life. In these early years, Madison began to develop the sense of restraint and reflection that would stay with him throughout his life. His quiet nature, combined with a health that required frequent rest, meant that he turned inward more often than others. He found solace in the study of history and philosophy, which would later become the foundation of his political ideals. These formative years in the tranquil landscapes of Virginia were marked not by dramatic events or the turmoil of war, but by a steady accumulation of knowledge. Little did anyone know the young man who spent so many quiet hours reading would one day craft the blueprint for a nation. As Madison grew older, it became increasingly clear that his intellectual curiosity surpassed the common expectations of his time. His thoughts were not just shaped by the learning of Latin or Greek, but by the ideas of the great European philosophers, many of whom were exploring the nature of government, liberty, and the rights of man. By the time Madison was a young man, the winds of change were stirring across the Atlantic. The American colonies, long subjects of British rule, were beginning to challenge the authority of the Crown, calling into question the very structure of governance. And though Madison was still a boy, the seeds of the revolution had already been planted in his mind. Madison's health continued to be a concern throughout his youth, and it was not long before his father decided to send him away for further education. In 1769, at the age of 18, Madison entered the College of New Jersey, later known as Princeton University, where he would experience a new chapter in his intellectual development. Princeton was a place of rigorous academic study, and the young Madison was an eager and serious student. It was here, among the works of John Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau, that Madison began to forge the political ideas that would guide his future actions. His time at Princeton would not only shape his intellectual pursuits, but would serve as a foundation for the values that he would one day bring to the halls of government. Though his health continued to trouble him, Madison's intellectual prowess was evident from the start. His professors and peers alike noted his quick mind and his deep, thoughtful engagement with the subjects he studied. He excelled in political theory and history, fields that would lay the groundwork for his later contributions to American political thought. He graduated in 1771 at the age of 20 with honours, yet despite his academic achievements, Madison's health remained fragile. After graduation, he returned to Montpelier, his home in Virginia, where he would spend the next few years recuperating and reflecting on the ideas that had taken root during his time at Princeton. This period of rest at Montpelier allowed Madison to immerse himself in the study of government, reading works on political philosophy, history, and the nature of civil society. As the American Revolution began to take shape in the early 1770s, Madison found himself increasingly drawn to the political ferment of the time. Though his health prevented him from joining the revolutionary cause as a soldier, he was deeply involved in the intellectual struggles that would define the coming conflict. The young man who had once been confined to the quiet of Montpellier's study would soon become one of the most important political thinkers in the newly emerging United States. It was also in these years that Madison began to forge the relationships that would shape his political career. He became involved in the political affairs of Virginia, working alongside other notable figures such as Thomas Jefferson, Patrick Henry, and George Washington. Madison's intellectual rigor, combined with his understanding of the political realities of the time, made him a valuable ally in the political sphere. It was here, in these quiet early years, that Madison began to develop his deep commitment to the ideals of republicanism, liberty, and the necessity of a strong, well-ordered government. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, Madison's political beliefs began to crystallize. He understood the importance of balancing liberty with order, the need for a system that could both preserve individual freedoms and protect the collective good. His studies of European governments, coupled with his experiences in Virginia, convinced him of the need for a new kind of government, one that could be based not on monarchy or aristocracy, but on the consent of the governed. Madison's early life, though not marked by great public events or grand gestures, was nevertheless shaped by a profound intellectual commitment to the ideals that would later form the foundation of the United States. James Madison's early life, with its blend of intellectual curiosity, personal restraint, and quiet determination, laid the groundwork for the remarkable political career that would follow. From his childhood in Virginia to his time at Princeton, he developed the intellectual tools that would allow him to navigate the complexities of revolutionary thought and the challenges of nation-building. In many ways, Madison's early life can be seen as a quiet preparation for the leadership he would one day offer to the fledgling United States, a preparation that was rooted not in the tumult of battle, but in the quiet study of ideas and the steady development of character. In the autumn of 1769, James Madison left the familiar grounds of Montpelier and embarked on a new chapter in his intellectual life. At the age of 18, he entered the College of New Jersey, now known as Princeton University. Though it was a time of political and social unrest, the college years for Madison were primarily focused on the cultivation of his mind. The academic environment at Princeton, with its rigorous intellectual standards, was the perfect place for Madison to refine the ideas that had already begun to take shape during his early life. It was here that his exposure to the works of Enlightenment thinkers would forge the foundation of his political philosophy. At Princeton, Madison was introduced to the complex world of political theory, where the works of Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau were debated and discussed. These thinkers, who had already begun to shape the intellectual landscape of Europe, would soon have a profound impact on the young Madison's understanding of the world. The study of these writers provided Madison with the tools to think critically about the structure of government and the rights of individuals within it. It was during these years that Madison's belief in the power of ideas and his commitment to the principles of republicanism began to deepen. Madison's time at Princeton was marked by more than just academic pursuits. Though he was a sickly young man, often prone to bouts of illness that would keep him confined to his room, he still managed to immerse himself fully in the intellectual life of the campus. His professors, including the president of the college, John Witherspoon, encouraged him to explore political philosophy and to engage in the discussions of the day. Witherspoon, a prominent figure in both the religious and political spheres, was a fierce advocate for the independence of the American colonies. His teachings would have a significant influence on Madison's evolving thoughts on government and liberty. While Madison's health continued to be a concern throughout his college years, his intellectual pursuits were never hindered. He was known for his quiet demeanor and thoughtful nature, yet his academic prowess quickly set him apart from his peers. Madison's serious approach to his studies was not only noted by his professors, but also by his fellow students, who recognized in him a young man of considerable promise. Though he did not seek attention or fame, his dedication to learning and his ability to engage deeply with complex ideas earned him the respect of those around him. The philosophy that Madison encountered at Princeton was centered on the idea of natural rights and the importance of government in securing these rights for the people. The writings of John Locke, particularly his ideas on the separation of powers and the consent of the governed, had a lasting impact on Madison. These ideas would later influence the structure of the United States Constitution, which Madison would help to draft in the years to come. Locke's emphasis on individual liberty and the necessity of government to protect those liberties resonated deeply with Madison, who had already developed a strong sense of the importance of political order and the need for a system that could balance individual freedoms with the common good. Madison also encountered the ideas of Montesquieu, whose work The Spirit of the Laws offered a detailed analysis of different types of government and their impact on society. Montesquieu's advocacy for the separation of powers and the system of checks and balances left a profound mark on Madison's thinking. These concepts would later become central elements of the U.S. Constitution, with Madison playing a key role in shaping the framework of the new government. Rousseau too left his mark on Madison during these formative years. Rousseau's belief in the general will and the importance of popular sovereignty aligned with Madison's own evolving ideas about the relationship between the government and the people. While Madison would later refine and sometimes diverge from Rousseau's theories, the idea of a government that was truly accountable to the people became a cornerstone of his political philosophy. Madison's time at Princeton was not just about absorbing the teachings of great philosophers, it was also a time when he began to develop his own thoughts on the nature of government, liberty, and the role of the individual in society. Though he was not yet fully aware of the influence he would one day wield on the national stage, Madison's college years were the intellectual crucible in which his ideas about Republican government and the structure of the United States would take form. By the time Madison graduated in 1771 at the age of 20, he had already laid the groundwork for the political beliefs that would guide him throughout his life. His education at Princeton, though interrupted by his frail health, had provided him with the intellectual tools to navigate the turbulent political landscape that lay ahead. As he returned to Virginia, Madison brought with him not only a deep understanding of political theory, but also a growing sense of responsibility to apply these ideas in the service of the emerging nation. Though Madison's health continued to be a source of concern, he was not content to rest on the intellectual achievements of his college years. He returned to Montpellier, where he spent several years furthering his studies and engaging with the political debates of the day. It was during this period of intellectual reflection and personal growth that Madison's commitment to the ideals of liberty and republican government deepened. His time at Princeton, marked by the study of political philosophy and the exploration of new ideas, was but the beginning of a journey that would see him become one of the most important political figures in American history. The years at Princeton also marked a pivotal moment in Madison's development, as they would later serve as the intellectual foundation for his contributions to the United States Constitution. It was here that the seeds of Madison's political philosophy were sown, nurtured by the ideas of the Enlightenment and the academic rigor of his education. His years at Princeton were not merely a time of personal study. They were the formative years that shaped the trajectory of Madison's life and the destiny of a young nation. After completing his studies at Princeton, James Madison returned to Virginia in 1771, a young man of 20, eager to continue his education, but also to contribute to the world around him. He found himself back in the quiet of Montpelier, the family estate, where he began to turn his attention to the political and social changes that were taking place throughout the American colonies. Though still fragile in health, Madison's intellectual curiosity remained sharp, and it was in these years of reflection and study that he began to seriously consider the nature of the political system that would soon govern the fledgling nation. The world Madison returned to was rapidly changing. The American colonies, having long been under the control of Great Britain, were now stirring with unrest. Tensions were rising as British policies increasingly encroached upon colonial autonomy. The British Crown's enforcement of taxes, such as the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, had stirred resentment among the colonies, who felt their rights and liberties were being trampled. Madison, who had long been a serious student of political theory, was now thrust into a world of political upheaval, where ideas about liberty, freedom, and governance were being discussed in earnest. In these years, Madison began to deeply consider the philosophical underpinnings of government, focusing on the balance between liberty and order. His studies at Princeton had introduced him to the works of John Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau, but it was now that he began to apply these ideas more directly to the real-world political issues facing America. The question of how to structure a government that would preserve the rights of individuals while ensuring the stability of society was central to Madison's thoughts during this period. As he grappled with these questions, Madison also became increasingly involved in the political life of Virginia. Though his health still required periods of rest and retreat, he took part in the debates that were beginning to take shape in the colony. He was especially drawn to the discussion surrounding the rights of the American colonies and the principles of self-governance. It was during these years of engagement with Virginia's political landscape that Madison's belief in a government that was responsive to the will of the people, yet able to maintain order, began to crystallize. In 1774, as tensions continued to rise, Madison took the step of formally entering into the political world. He was elected to the Virginia Convention, where the colonies would discuss their response to British actions. In the years that followed, Madison would grow in political stature, participating in various conventions and legislative bodies. He would also begin to develop his close relationship with other political figures, such as Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe, who would become central to his political career. Madison's early political career was marked by a sense of caution and deliberation. He was a man who believed deeply in the importance of structure and reason in governance, and his views on the role of government were informed by both his intellectual studies and the events unfolding around him. In contrast to some of his more fiery contemporaries, Madison was measured in his approach, preferring reasoned debate and the pursuit of a practical, workable solution to the problems that faced the colonies. In 1776, as the Declaration of Independence was signed and the colonies formally declared their independence from Britain, Madison's thoughts on governance became even more pressing. With the old system of monarchy cast aside, the question of what form the new government should take became one of the central issues of the day. Madison believed that a republic governed by the people and focused on protecting individual liberties was the ideal system for the new nation. He was influenced by the writings of the Enlightenment thinkers, who argued that government should be based on the consent of the governed, and that power should be distributed in such a way as to avoid the concentration of authority in the hands of a single ruler or group. In the years following the Declaration of Independence, Madison continued his work in the Virginia legislature, advocating for reforms that would reflect the Republican ideals he had embraced. He supported the separation of powers within government, recognizing that a system of checks and balances would help prevent the rise of tyranny. He also pushed for the protection of individual rights, arguing that a Bill of Rights was essential to safeguarding the liberties of the people. By 1780, Madison had become a leading voice in Virginia's political scene. He was a member of the Virginia legislature and had become increasingly involved in the broader political discourse that was sweeping the American colonies. The ideals of liberty, equality, and self-governance were now at the forefront of American politics, and Madison, deeply influenced by these principles, would continue to push for the establishment of a government that was grounded in reason, balance, and the rule of law. As the Revolutionary War continued to unfold, Madison's role in Virginia's government expanded. He became more directly involved in the shaping of policy, working on a range of issues that were central to the fledgling nation's survival and success. He also continued to refine his ideas on government, gradually coming to the realization that the Articles of Confederation, which had initially governed the United States, were insufficient for the challenges the country faced. Though the Articles had helped to unite the colonies during the war, they were now proving to be an inadequate framework for a stable and effective government. It was during these years, as Madison observed the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, that he began to envision a new system of government, one that would be stronger, more unified, and better able to address the challenges of the post-war world. This idea would set the stage for Madison's future involvement in the Constitutional Convention, where he would play a central role in shaping the United States Constitution. By the mid-1770s, the American colonies were on the brink of revolution. The struggle for independence from Great Britain was intensifying, and James Madison, though not yet a soldier on the battlefield, was becoming increasingly involved in the intellectual and political discussions that would define the nation's future. As tensions grew and the call for independence grew louder, Madison's intellectual grounding in Enlightenment philosophy, particularly in the principles of liberty and self-government, positioned him as a key figure in the shaping of the fledgling nation. While Madison's health continued to limit his physical participation in the war itself, his role as a political thinker and writer was becoming more pronounced. His early involvement in the Virginia legislature and the state's political circles had already placed him in close contact with many of the leading voices of the Revolution. It was within this context of political ferment and ideological exchange that Madison began to refine his thoughts on government, liberty, and the rights of individuals. As the Revolutionary War unfolded, Madison witnessed firsthand the complexities and struggles of a nation in its infancy. In 1776, when the Declaration of Independence was signed, he was not yet a prominent figure on the national stage. But the document's ideals, particularly its affirmation of self-government and individual rights, resonated deeply with him. It was a defining moment for many of the nation's leaders, and for Madison, it reinforced his commitment to creating a government that would be based on principles of freedom and the rule of law. Madison's intellectual development during the Revolution was not confined to his home state of Virginia. He closely followed the broader political and philosophical debates that were taking place in the American colonies, especially as they related to the proper form of government for the new nation. He was particularly concerned with the question of how best to ensure the preservation of liberty in the face of powerful political forces. The balance between central authority and local autonomy would be a theme that would occupy much of Madison's thinking throughout his life. In these years, Madison began to see the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. the first governing document of the United States. Though the Articles had served their purpose in uniting the colonies during the Revolutionary War, Madison realized that the system they had created was inadequate for governing a new nation in peacetime. The lack of a strong central government and the inability to regulate trade, collect taxes, and enforce laws left the country vulnerable to internal strife and external threats. Madison understood that a stronger, more cohesive system of government would be necessary to ensure the survival of the United States. In addition to his concerns about the Articles of Confederation, Madison was also grappling with broader questions about the nature of republican government. How could a republic ensure the protection of individual liberties while also maintaining order and stability? How could a system of government prevent the rise of factions that might undermine the common good? These were not questions that Madison took lightly, and they would occupy much of his thinking in the years to come. During the Revolutionary War, Madison became increasingly involved in the political affairs of Virginia. He was appointed to the Virginia House of Delegates in 1776, and over the next few years he played an active role in the state's political life. He was deeply involved in debates about the role of government and the rights of individuals, and he continued to refine his ideas about republicanism and the structure of government. In addition to his work in Virginia, Madison also began to develop relationships with other key figures in the revolutionary movement, including Thomas Jefferson. The two men would become close allies in the years to come, and their shared commitment to Republican principles would form the foundation of their political partnership. Jefferson, with his vision of a democratic republic, and Madison, with his deep understanding of political theory, were well matched in their approach to the challenges facing the young nation. As the war progressed, Madison's political career began to take shape. His concerns about the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation were echoed by other leaders, and in the years following the war he became increasingly vocal about the need for constitutional reform. His growing influence in Virginia, along with his deep understanding of political philosophy, made him a key player in the debates that would shape the future of the United States. The war itself was, of course, a time of great sacrifice and hardship. The American Revolution had cost the colonies dearly, both in terms of lives lost and resources spent, yet it also forged a sense of unity among the people as they fought for a common cause. Madison, though not a soldier on the front lines, shared in the sacrifices and struggles of the Revolution. His commitment to the cause of independence and self-governance was unwavering, and he became increasingly convinced that the nation's future would depend on the establishment of a more effective and lasting system of government. By the end of the Revolutionary War, the United States had gained its independence, but it was far from stable. The Articles of Confederation had served their purpose in uniting the colonies during the war, but they had proven inadequate for governing the post-war nation. Madison's growing sense of urgency about the need for reform would soon lead him to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, where he would play a central role in crafting the new framework of government. The American Revolution had been a victory not only for military forces but also for the ideals of republicanism and self-government. But the work of establishing a functional, enduring government was only just beginning. Madison, with his deep understanding of political theory, his commitment to liberty, and his belief in the importance of a balanced system of government, would be at the heart of this next great challenge. By 1787, the United States found itself at a crossroads. The Revolutionary War had been won, but the nation's experiment with the Articles of Confederation was proving to be an unsustainable model for governance. The Articles, which had initially served as a temporary measure during the war, were now seen as inadequate for maintaining order, regulating trade, and ensuring the young republic's long-term stability. Economic struggles, interstate conflicts, and the inability to raise revenue or enforce laws under the Articles revealed the weaknesses of the existing system. It was against this backdrop of crisis and uncertainty that James Madison began his most important political work. As a delegate to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Madison would play a central role in drafting the United States Constitution, a document that would lay the foundation for the nation's government for centuries to come. Madison's deep intellectual commitment to the principles of republicanism and his concern for the balance of power would guide his actions throughout the convention. His vision for a strong central government, capable of maintaining order while preserving individual liberties, would shape much of the final document. Madison arrived in Philadelphia in May 1787, already convinced that a complete overhaul of the Articles of Confederation was necessary. He had come to see that the Articles, with their loose confederation of states and limited powers of the central government, were insufficient for dealing with the challenges of governing a growing and increasingly complex nation. Instead of merely amending the Articles, Madison advocated for a new framework altogether, one that would create a much stronger central government with the authority to regulate commerce, collect taxes, and enforce laws. Though Madison was not the only delegate at the Constitutional Convention advocating for a new system of government, his vision of a balanced republic would become the blueprint for the Constitution itself. Madison's understanding of political theory and his ability to navigate the complex debates at the convention were crucial in pushing the agenda for a strong federal government. He was not alone in his views, of course. Other key figures, including George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Alexander Hamilton, shared his belief in the need for a stronger central authority. Yet it was Madison, with his quiet determination and intellectual rigor, who became the chief architect of the Constitution. The convention was not without its tensions. Delegates from smaller states feared that a strong central government would leave them powerless in comparison to the larger states. This conflict came to a head in the debate over the structure of the new government. Larger states, like Virginia and Pennsylvania, argued for a government in which representation in Congress would be based on population, giving them greater influence. Smaller states, like New Jersey and Delaware, feared that such a system would marginalize them, and they called for equal representation regardless of population size. Madison's solution to this impasse was to propose the Virginia Plan, a sweeping proposal that called for a bicameral legislature with representation in both houses based on population. The Virginia Plan also called for a strong executive and a judiciary with the power to interpret laws and enforce them. This plan was the most radical and comprehensive proposal put forward at the convention, and though it was modified during the course of the debates, it laid the foundation for the eventual structure of the federal government. While the Virginia Plan was a bold proposal, it was not universally accepted. Delegates from smaller states, led by William Paterson of New Jersey, countered with the New Jersey Plan, which called for a unicameral legislature with equal representation for each state, regardless of population size. This proposal was intended to protect the interests of the smaller states, ensuring that they would not be overshadowed by the larger, more populous states. The debate between the Virginia and New Jersey plans was heated, but it ultimately led to the Great Compromise, a solution that combined elements of both proposals. The new system called for a bicameral legislature, with the House of Representatives based on population and the Senate offering equal representation for each state. Though the Great Compromise resolved the question of representation, other issues remained. Madison, ever mindful of the potential for factions, groups of citizens united by shared interests but potentially hostile to the common good, argued for a system of government that would balance competing interests. He believed that the separation of powers would prevent any one branch of government from gaining too much power. In addition, Madison pushed for the idea of checks and balances, which would ensure that each branch of government could limit the powers of the others, creating a stable and effective system. Madison's thoughts on the structure of government were shaped by his concerns about human nature. He believed that people were inherently self-interested, and that a system of government needed to account for these tendencies. His solution was a government that would be divided into distinct branches, each with the ability to check the power of the others. This would prevent any one faction, whether it be a majority or a powerful minority, from gaining control over the entire government. Madison's belief in the importance of a balanced government would eventually be codified in the Constitution, which established the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, each with specific powers and responsibilities. Despite the compromises and debates that took place during the convention, the final product was a remarkably cohesive document. Madison's influence on the document was profound, and many of the ideas he championed were incorporated into the Constitution. The document that emerged from the convention created a federal government with the power to regulate commerce, raise revenue, and provide for the common defense. It also established a system of checks and balances that would prevent any one branch of government from gaining too much power. The Constitution, as it was finalized on September 17, 1787, was a direct reflection of Madison's political philosophy and his commitment to creating a government that would balance the need for order with the protection of individual rights. The ratification of the Constitution was by no means assured. Many Americans were still wary of a strong central government, and the battle for ratification would be long and difficult. Madison, along with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, took to the pen to defend the new Constitution, writing a series of essays known as the Federalist Papers. These essays, which explained the principles behind the Constitution and argued for its adoption, would become a cornerstone of American political thought. In the months following the Constitutional Convention, the debate over the ratification of the United States Constitution reached a fever pitch. While many saw the proposed Constitution as a vital step toward a more unified and stable government, others feared that it would grant too much power to a central authority, undermining the freedoms of individual states and citizens. As the struggle for ratification unfolded across the nation, James Madison, along with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, took to the written word to advocate for the new government. Their collaboration resulted in the Federalist Papers, a series of 85 essays written to defend the Constitution and persuade the states to ratify it. Madison's contributions to the Federalist Papers were among the most influential and important. While Hamilton and Jay also made significant contributions, it was Madison's essays that most clearly articulated the philosophical foundations of the Constitution and explained the system of government it proposed. His arguments in favor of a strong, centralized federal government would become a cornerstone of American political thought, shaping the country's understanding of republicanism and the importance of checks and balances. Madison's primary concern in writing the Federalist Papers was to address the fears of those who opposed the Constitution, particularly the fear that a strong central government would inevitably lead to tyranny. He understood that for the new government to succeed, it would need the support of a majority of the states, and that meant convincing the public that the Constitution would not threaten the liberties of individual citizens or the rights of the states. One of Madison's most important arguments was that a large republic, with a diverse population and competing interests, would be the best safeguard against the rise of tyranny. Drawing on the ideas of Montesquieu and others, Madison argued that the larger the republic, the less likely it was that any one faction could dominate the government. In a small republic, he wrote, it was easy for a single faction to gain control and impose its will on the rest of the population, but in a large republic the diversity of interest would make it much more difficult for any one group to gain sufficient power to threaten the rights of others. In Federalist Number 10, perhaps his most famous essay, Madison argued that the Constitution's system of government, with its separation of powers and checks and balances, would effectively prevent the rise of factions. He explained that factions, groups of people united by a common interest, were inevitable in any society, but that a well-constructed republic could limit their influence. Madison believed that a government that was representative of the people and balanced by competing interests would prevent any single faction from gaining control and infringing upon the rights of others. This idea of factionalism was central to Madison's thinking. He understood that people are inherently motivated by self-interest, and that without a system of government designed to regulate those interests, society could quickly descend into chaos. The structure of the federal government that he and his colleagues had designed, with its separation of powers and its ability to balance competing interests, was intended to address this challenge. Madison also addressed concerns about the potential for a powerful executive to emerge and dominate the government. Some opponents of the Constitution feared that the presidency would become a vehicle for tyranny, allowing one man to accumulate too much power. Madison, however, argued that the presidency, as designed in the Constitution, would be a limited office, subject to the checks and balances of the other branches of government. The president would not have unchecked authority, and the system of separation of powers would ensure that no one branch could become too powerful. In Federalist Number 51, Madison further expanded on the importance of checks and balances, arguing that the structure of the government itself would prevent any one branch from gaining too much control. He wrote that the ambition of one branch would be countered by the ambition of another, creating a system of government in which no one part could dominate the others. For Madison, the key to preventing tyranny was not to eliminate ambition or self-interest, but to create a system in which those forces would be channeled and controlled. Another key issue that Madison addressed in the Federalist Papers was the protection of individual liberties. Many opponents of the Constitution argued that it did not do enough to protect the rights of citizens, particularly when it came to the issue of a Bill of Rights. While Madison had originally been hesitant to include a Bill of Rights, he came to see its importance as a political tool to ensure the protection of individual freedoms. In the early stages of the ratification debates, he worked alongside other Federalists to emphasize that the Constitution itself would provide sufficient protections for liberty, but he later acknowledged the need for specific guarantees. After the Constitution was ratified, Madison worked with others to ensure that the Bill of Rights was included. These first 10 amendments to the Constitution would guarantee basic freedoms such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to a fair trial. Madison's role in this process reflected his commitment to creating a government that balanced the power of the state with the rights of the individual. The impact of the Federalist Papers cannot be overstated. These essays played a crucial role in securing the ratification of the Constitution, particularly in key states like New York and Virginia, where opposition to the document was strong. Madison's arguments for a strong, balanced federal government were persuasive and helped to ease the fears of those who worried about the potential for tyranny. Today, the Federalist Papers remain a foundational text in American political thought. Madison's contributions to these essays have shaped our understanding of republicanism, the structure of government, and the protection of individual rights. His work in defending the Constitution was not just a political act, but an intellectual endeavor that would leave a lasting legacy on the nation he helped to create. After the Constitutional Convention concluded in 1787, the proposed Constitution faced its most significant challenge: ratification by the states. The Constitution's framers, including James Madison, understood that for the new government to be successful, it would need the support of a majority of the states. Yet the opposition to the document was fierce, with many fearing that the proposed system would grant too much power to the federal government at the expense of individual rights and state sovereignty. The ratification process unfolded state by state, with some states quickly endorsing the new constitution, while others resisted. Madison, who had played a key role in drafting the document, now turned his attention to securing its approval, particularly in his home state of Virginia. He knew that Virginia, with its large population and strategic importance, would be pivotal in determining whether the Constitution would be adopted by the young republic. The battle for ratification was a protracted and contentious one. Opponents of the Constitution, known as the Anti-Federalists, argued that the proposed government would lead to tyranny. They feared that the central government would become too powerful, and that the rights of the people and the states would be threatened. They also criticized the absence of a Bill of Rights, which they believed was essential to protect individual liberties. Madison, along with other Federalists such as Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, took to the pen to defend the Constitution. In a series of essays known as the Federalist Papers, they made the case for a strong federal government, arguing that the new system would provide stability, protect individual rights, and prevent the rise of factions that could threaten the common good. Madison's contributions to the Federalist Papers were particularly influential, as he outlined the philosophical underpinnings of the Constitution and addressed concerns about the potential for tyranny. His essays emphasized the importance of checks and balances, the separation of powers, and the need for a government that would be both strong and responsive to the will of the people. But despite the efforts of the Federalists, the opposition to the Constitution was not easily overcome. The Anti-Federalists, led by figures such as Patrick Henry and George Mason, argued that the proposed government would strip away the freedoms that Madison won during the Revolution. They feared that the president would become a monarch, and that the central government would undermine the authority of state governments. The debates in the state ratifying conventions were intense, and Virginia was no exception. Madison knew that Virginia's ratification was crucial to the success of the new Constitution. In the summer of 1788, the Virginia Ratifying Convention convened in Richmond, and Madison took center stage in the debates. The Anti-Federalists were led by some of the most prominent political figures in the state, including Patrick Henry, who was an outspoken critic of the proposed Constitution. Madison's speeches at the Virginia Ratifying Convention were measured and persuasive. He argued that the Constitution was designed to create a government that would balance power between the federal and state governments, while also protecting individual liberties. He acknowledged that the document was not perfect, but he stressed that it was the best option available for ensuring the survival and prosperity of the nation. One of the key points of contention at the Virginia Convention was the issue of a Bill of Rights. The Anti-Federalists argued that without explicit protections for individual freedoms, the government could easily infringe upon the rights of the people. Madison, initially hesitant to include a Bill of Rights, came to see the political necessity of such a measure. He assured the convention that, if ratified, the new government would quickly move to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution. This promise, along with his compelling arguments for the Constitution's broader protections of liberty, helped to sway many of the delegates. The Virginia Convention was a hard-fought battle, but ultimately the Federalists prevailed. The Constitution was ratified by Virginia on June 25, 1788, by a narrow margin of 89 votes to 79. This victory was a significant turning point in the ratification process, as Virginia's endorsement lent considerable legitimacy to the new government. With Virginia's ratification, the tide began to turn in favor of the Constitution. Other states followed suit, and by the end of 1788, the Constitution had been ratified by the necessary 9 states. On March 4, 1789, the new federal government began operations under the Constitution, with George Washington serving as the first president. Madison's role in securing the ratification of the Constitution was not only a testament to his political acumen, but also to his steadfast belief in the principles of republicanism and the rule of law. His ability to persuade key figures in Virginia, along with his contributions to the Federalist Papers, played a central role in the success of the ratification process. Yet, Madison knew that the battle of the Constitution was far from over. The new government was fragile, and the promise of a Bill of Rights had to be fulfilled to ensure the support of those who had remained skeptical. The ratification of the Constitution marked the beginning of a new chapter in American history, but the work of securing the principles of liberty and self-government was only just beginning. The ratification process was a defining moment in Madison's career. It was a time when his deep commitment to the ideals of the American Revolution, liberty, self-government, and the protection of individual rights, was tested and ultimately vindicated. The new Constitution, with Madison's influence firmly embedded in its structure, would become the framework for the United States government, setting the stage for the challenges and triumphs that would follow. This successful ratification of the United States Constitution in 1788 marked the beginning of a new era for the young nation. With the government now in place, the United States faced the monumental task of transitioning from a loose confederation of states to a more unified and functioning republic. James Madison, having played such a crucial role in crafting the Constitution, found himself in the midst of this transformative period. As a member of the newly formed Congress, Madison worked tirelessly to help shape the early structure of the federal government, while addressing the pressing issues of the post-Revolutionary War era. One of the first tasks before the new government was to establish its fundamental operations. The country was still dealing with the aftermath of war, economic instability, war debts, and the threat of foreign intervention. Madison's early work in the federal government focused on building a solid foundation for the Republic's survival. Under the leadership of George Washington, the first President of the United States, and with Madison's active participation, the new government began to take shape. The first Congress, convening in 1789, was tasked with implementing the principles of the Constitution. One of the most pressing issues was the establishment of the Bill of Rights, which had been promised during the ratification debates. Madison, who had initially been hesitant to push for such amendments, now saw them as essential to securing the support of those who had remained skeptical about the new government. As a member of the House of Representatives, Madison introduced a series of amendments, which would eventually become the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was not only a political necessity but also a moral one. Madison recognized the importance of protecting individual freedoms and ensuring that the government would be held accountable to the people. The amendments, which guaranteed fundamental rights such as freedom of speech, religion, and the press, as well as protections against unreasonable search and seizure and cruel and unusual punishment, were a vital safeguard for the liberties of Americans. The passage of the Bill of Rights in 1791 was a critical moment in the history of the United States, solidifying Madison's role as a champion of the individual rights. At the same time, Madison continued to work on other critical issues facing the fledgling republic. The country's economic situation was dire. The war had left the United States deeply in debt, and the federal government lacked the power to levy taxes or regulate trade under the Articles of Confederation. One of the early challenges was determining how to manage the nation's finances and establish a stable currency. Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, proposed a plan to assume the state debts and create a national bank. Madison, who had once been a staunch opponent of centralized financial power, initially resisted Hamilton's plan, fearing that it would grant too much power to the federal government. However, over time, Madison came to see the necessity of a strong central financial system. While he remained cautious about the concentration of power in the federal government, he recognized that the country's economic survival depended on creating a system that could manage debt, regulate commerce, and facilitate the growth of industry. Despite their differences, Madison and Hamilton forged a political alliance that would shape the early years of the Republic. Together, they worked to establish a financial system that would stabilize the economy and lay the groundwork for future growth. Another challenge for the early Republic was foreign relations. The United States, newly independent, found itself in a precarious position between European powers. France, with whom the United States had formed an alliance during the Revolution, was embroiled in its own revolutionary struggles. Meanwhile, Great Britain, though defeated in the war, was still a formidable global power with significant influence in the Western Hemisphere. The United States had to navigate its relationship with these nations while also managing the interests of Native American tribes and dealing with the ongoing issue of slavery in the southern states. In 1793, the French Revolution reached a critical point, and France called on the United States to honor its revolutionary alliance. This put the US government in a difficult position. Madison, along with many others, sympathized with the French cause but was wary of becoming too entangled in European conflicts. President Washington, taking a cautious approach, issued the Neutrality Proclamation, which declared that the United States would not take sides in the conflict between France and Great Britain. Madison initially supported this stance, though his opinion shifted over time as the French Revolution evolved and as the challenges of maintaining neutrality became apparent. In the years following the establishment of the new government, Madison's role continued to evolve. While he was committed to the principles of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, he was also growing increasingly concerned about the direction of the political system. The rise of political parties, particularly the Federalists led by Hamilton and the Democratic Republicans, led by Madison and Jefferson, highlighted the divisions within the young republic. Madison, who had initially been wary of political parties, now found himself at the forefront of a growing opposition to Hamilton's vision of a strong centralized government. The 1790s marked a period of intense political competition between these two factions. The Federalists, led by Hamilton and backed by Washington, advocated for a strong national government, a national bank, and a pro-British foreign policy. The Democratic Republicans, led by Madison and Jefferson, opposed Hamilton's economic policies and favoured a more limited federal government, with greater power vested in the states. Madison, whose views had evolved over time, found himself increasingly in opposition to the Federalists, particularly on issues such as the national bank and the centralization of power in the federal government. In 1794, Madison's political philosophy was put to the test when he and Jefferson founded the Democratic Republican Party as a counterbalance to the growing power of the Federalists. Their party advocated for the protection of individual liberties, states' rights, and a more decentralized form of government, while Madison remained committed to the principles of republicanism and the Constitution. His political journey was becoming more complex as he grappled with the tensions between federal power and state sovereignty. By the time Thomas Jefferson assumed the presidency in 1801, the United States had grown and evolved considerably since its birth. The nation had weathered early challenges, including the ratification of the Constitution, the formation of the Bill of Rights, and the creation of a stable financial system. The political landscape, however, was still very much in flux, with tensions between the growing Federalist influence and the emerging Democratic Republican opposition led by Madison and Jefferson. With Jefferson's election, a new chapter in American politics began, and Madison, having long been one of Jefferson's closest allies, would continue to play a vital role in shaping the direction of the country. Madison's partnership with Jefferson was built on a shared vision of limited government and states' rights, which aligned with their growing concerns about the increasing power of the federal government, particularly under the influence of figures like Alexander Hamilton. While Jefferson's presidency marked a shift away from the Federalist agenda, Madison's role as Jefferson's Secretary of State from 1801 to 1809 would be marked by both political challenges and opportunities for the nation to define its place in this world. As Jefferson's Secretary of State, Madison was responsible for handling the nation's foreign policy, a task that required delicate diplomacy. The early years of Jefferson's presidency were filled with tensions between European powers, particularly Great Britain and France, both of whom sought to assert their influence in the Western Hemisphere. One of the most significant challenges during this period was the struggle for neutral trade rights, as the United States found itself caught between the conflict of European powers. The British, still the dominant naval power in the world, frequently violated the United States' neutral shipping rights. This was especially evident in the practice of impressment, where the British Navy would capture American sailors and force them into British service. Jefferson, a strong advocate of American sovereignty, was determined to protect the nation's rights on the high seas. However, his response to these challenges was largely focused on diplomacy, and in 1807, Jefferson implemented the Embargo Act, which sought to punish both Britain and France for their violations by halting all American trade with foreign nations. The Embargo Act, however, had significant unintended consequences. It devastated the American economy, particularly in the Northeast, where merchants and traders relied heavily on international commerce. Madison, who had become increasingly involved in Jefferson's administration, found himself at the center of the political debate over the Embargo Act's effectiveness. While the embargo was intended to force Britain and France to respect American neutral rights, its economic fallout and failure to bring the desired results led to growing dissatisfaction. The Act's failure played a role in the shifting political landscape, ultimately contributing to the Democratic Republicans losing favor among some segments of the American public. Despite the failure of the Embargo Act, Madison's tenure as Secretary of State was not without success. One of the key accomplishments during this period was the resolution of conflicts with Spain over the boundaries of the United States territory. The United States had long been engaged in diplomatic negotiations with Spain regarding the ownership of Florida and the Mississippi River. Through Madison's diplomatic efforts, the United States secured control over Florida in 1819, a significant expansion of American territory that was achieved peacefully. This success was a testament to Madison's diplomatic skills, as he was able to navigate complex international negotiations and secure territorial gains for the nation without resorting to war. The period of Madison's service as Secretary of State also saw the strengthening of American foreign relations. While the United States faced considerable challenges from European powers, Madison's foreign policy emphasized the importance of maintaining American independence and asserting the nation's rights on the international stage. His careful diplomacy laid the foundation for future American expansion and influence in the Western Hemisphere. Madison's tenure as Secretary of State, while marked by difficult challenges, was also a time when he solidified his reputation as a thoughtful, measured political leader. His ability to balance the competing interests of various factions, manage delicate foreign affairs, and work alongside President Jefferson to shape the direction of the nation demonstrated the depth of his political acumen. The relationship between Madison and Jefferson, founded on mutual respect and shared ideals, remained a key element in the shaping of the early United States, as both men sought to preserve the Republic's independence and ensure its long-term success. Madison's role in Jefferson's administration was critical in laying the groundwork for his own future presidency. The challenges of foreign policy, particularly in dealing with the European powers and maintaining American neutrality, helped Madison hone the skills that would prove essential when he became president in 1809. In many ways, Madison's time as Jefferson's Secretary of State served as a preparation for the more complicated responsibilities he would face as the nation's fourth president. The political climate during Jefferson's presidency was marked by increasing divisions within American politics. While Jefferson and Madison had worked together to dismantle the Federalist agenda, the nation's growing problems with foreign powers, internal divisions, and economic instability made clear that the early years of the Republic were far from secure. Madison would soon find himself at the forefront of these challenges as he prepared to assume the presidency. James Madison's presidency which began in 1809, would prove to be a defining period in the history of the United States. Though his earlier career had been marked by his intellectual contributions to the Constitution and his leadership in foreign diplomacy, it was during his time in the White House that Madison would face one of the most significant challenges to the young nation's existence, the War of 1812. The roots of the War of 1812 lay in the complex and often hostile relationship between the United States and the European powers, particularly Great Britain and France. After the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, both Britain and France sought to expand their influence on the high seas, frequently violating American shipping rights. The British practice of impressment, seizing American sailors and forcing them into British naval service, was particularly infuriating. At the same time, British support of Native American tribes in their efforts to resist American expansion westward added fuel to the growing tensions. Madison, having come into the presidency with a deep commitment to the principles of liberty and national sovereignty, found himself grappling with an international environment that seemed determined to undermine both. The United States, with its relatively small military and weak economic infrastructure, was no match for the powerful forces of Europe. Yet, despite the challenges, Madison believed that the United States had to stand firm in asserting its rights and protecting its citizens from foreign interference. In 1812, after years of diplomatic efforts that failed to secure American neutrality on the seas, Madison requested a declaration of war from Congress. The decision was not made lightly. The War of 1812 was deeply divisive. While many in the West and South supported it, seeing it as an opportunity to secure territory and assert American dominance, others, particularly in the Northeast, viewed it with skepticism. They feared the economic disruption it would cause, especially since the United States was still recovering from the effects of the Embargo Act and other trade restrictions. Madison's decision to go to war was based on a belief that the United States could no longer tolerate British interference with American sovereignty. The war, which would last for over 2 years, would test the nation's resolve and its capacity to defend itself. The early years of the conflict proved challenging, as the United States found itself unprepared for a sustained war against one of the most powerful military forces in the world. The war itself unfolded on several fronts, both in North America and at sea. Early attempts by the United States to invade Canada, hoping to gain control of the British-controlled territory, were unsuccessful. The British, who had their own battles to fight in Europe, were able to send forces to North America, including Native American allies who resisted American expansion. The United States was also heavily reliant on its own militia forces, which were often ill-equipped and poorly trained compared to the British regulars. At sea, the United States fared better. The US Navy, though small, managed to secure several victories against the British, demonstrating that the new nation could hold its own against the most powerful navy in the world. Yet despite these successes, the overall conduct of the war was fraught with difficulties. Madison and his administration faced criticism for the lack of coordination between the military and political leadership, as well as the logistical challenges of waging war on such a large scale. One of the most dramatic moments of the War of 1812 came in 1814, when British forces captured Washington, D.C. and set fire to the White House and the Capitol. The event, which shocked the nation, served as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of the United States. Yet it also became a rallying point for American resolve. The United States managed to recover from the loss, and later that year, the British were defeated at the Battle of New Orleans by General Andrew Jackson, whose victory became a symbol of American strength and resilience. The war eventually came to a close with the signing of the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, although news of the peace treaty did not reach the United States until early 1815. The treaty restored pre-war borders but did not address the issues of impressment or trade rights that had initially sparked the conflict. Nonetheless, the war helped to solidify American independence in the eyes of both the American public and the European powers. The United States had shown that it would defend its sovereignty and its rights, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The War of 1812 left a lasting legacy for Madison and for the nation. It demonstrated the importance of military preparedness and the need for strong national leadership in times of crisis. Despite the hardships of the war, Madison emerged from the conflict with his reputation intact, particularly for his unwavering commitment to American independence and the principles of Republican government. The war also marked the end of the Federalist Party, which had strongly opposed the war and whose opposition was seen as unpatriotic. With the Federalist Party in decline, the era known as the Era of Good Feelings began, marked by political unity and a sense of national purpose. In the years following the war, Madison would work to strengthen the country's military and economic infrastructure, ensuring that the lessons of the conflict were not forgotten. His leadership during this turbulent period would cement his place in history as a statesman who helped guide the nation through one of its most trying times. The conclusion of the War of 1812 and the signing of the Treaty of Ghent in 1814 marked a significant turning point for the United States. Though the treaty did not resolve all the issues that had led to the war, such as impressment and trade restrictions, the conflict nonetheless left an indelible mark on the national psyche. The war had, in many ways, proved the resilience of the young republic and established the United States as a nation that could stand its ground on the world stage. Yet, as the nation emerged from the war, it faced a new set of challenges that would test its unity and its future trajectory. For President James Madison, the post-war years were a time to rebuild and strengthen the nation. The war had highlighted many of the United States' vulnerabilities, including weaknesses in its military, its economy, and its infrastructure. Despite the challenges, the post-war era brought with it a sense of a national pride and optimism, and Madison's leadership would play a key role in guiding the country through these years of recovery. One of the first issues that Madison tackled after the war was the rebuilding of the nation's military. The United States had entered the War of 1812 with a relatively small and ill-equipped army, relying heavily on state militias. The war had revealed the need for a more professional and standing military force, capable of defending the nation's interests. In response, Madison supported the establishment of a more permanent military infrastructure, which included the expansion of the Army and Navy, as well as improvements in the nation's defensive capabilities. Madison also turned his attention to economic recovery. The war had disrupted trade, caused inflation, and led to the accumulation of national debt. In response to these economic challenges, Madison supported the rechartering of the First Bank of the United States, which had been dissolved in 1811 due to political opposition. The re-establishment of a national bank was seen as a necessary step in stabilizing the currency, managing the country's debt, and ensuring economic growth. While Madison had once been wary of centralized financial power, the experience of the war had convinced him that a strong central financial institution was essential for the country's long-term prosperity. The period following the war also saw significant improvements in the nation's infrastructure. Madison, along with his successor James Monroe, supported internal improvements such as the construction of roads, canals, and other transportation networks. These efforts were designed to connect the growing population of the United States and promote economic development. The most significant of these projects was the construction of the National Road, which stretched from Maryland to Illinois and facilitated the movement of people and goods across the western frontier. Despite these efforts to strengthen the nation's infrastructure, Madison faced continued opposition from those who believed that the federal government should not play a significant role in internal improvements. Madison, who had long been a proponent of limited government, was torn between his belief in states' rights and the practical need for federal involvement in building a unified national infrastructure. This tension between federal and state authority would remain a defining issue in American politics for many years to come. Another challenge Madison faced in the post-war years was the growing issue of slavery. The institution of slavery, which had been a divisive issue since the nation's founding, became even more contentious in the wake of the War of 1812. The expansion of the United States into new territories, particularly in the West, raised questions about whether slavery would be allowed to spread into these areas. The debate over slavery would eventually lead to the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which sought to maintain the balance between free and slave states in the Union. Madison, who had been a slaveholder himself, was deeply conflicted over the issue, recognizing the moral and political challenges it presented. The period after the War of 1812 also marked a shift in American foreign policy. With the war behind them, the United States sought to assert its influence in the Western Hemisphere. One of the most significant foreign policy developments during Madison's presidency was his support for the Monroe Doctrine, which was articulated by President James Monroe in 1823. The Monroe Doctrine declared that the Western Hemisphere was closed to further European colonization, and that any attempts by European powers to interfere in the Americas would be seen as an act of aggression against the United States. Madison, although no longer in office when the Monroe Doctrine was officially declared, had played a key role in shaping the United States' approach to foreign policy. The Monroe Doctrine would become a cornerstone of American foreign policy, reflecting the nation's growing sense of independence and its determination to protect its interests in the Western Hemisphere. Despite the optimism of the post-war years, Madison's final years in office were marked by increasing political division. The political landscape was shifting, and the Democratic-Republican Party, which had dominated American politics since the nation's founding, was beginning to fragment. The era of the so-called Virginia dynasty, in which Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and James Monroe had held the presidency, was drawing to a close. Madison's own political influence began to wane as new generations of political leaders, such as John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, began to rise to prominence. As Madison's presidency came to an end in 1817, the United States found itself at a crossroads. The nation had survived the challenges of the War of 1812, and its post-war recovery had laid the groundwork for future prosperity. Yet the country remained deeply divided over issues such as slavery, states' rights, and the role of the federal government. The challenges Madison faced during his presidency would continue to shape the course of American history long after he left office. The conclusion of the War of 1812 and the signing of the Treaty of Ghent in 1814 marked a significant turning point for the United States. Though the treaty did not resolve all the issues that had led to the war, such as impressment and trade restrictions, the conflict nonetheless left an indelible mark on the national psyche. The war had, in many ways, proved the resilience of the young republic and established the United States as a nation that could stand its ground on the world stage. Yet, as the nation emerged from the war, it faced a new set of challenges that would test its unity and its future trajectory. For President James Madison, the post-war years were a time to rebuild and strengthen the nation. The war had highlighted many of the United States' vulnerabilities, including weaknesses in its military, its economy, and its infrastructure. Despite the challenges, the post-war era brought with it a sense of national pride and optimism, and Madison's leadership would play a key role in guiding the country through these years of recovery. One of the first issues that Madison tackled after the war was the rebuilding of the nation's military. The United States had entered the War of 1812 with a relatively small and ill-equipped army, relying heavily on state militias. The war had revealed the need for a more professional and standing military force, capable of defending the nation's interests. In response, Madison supported the establishment of a more permanent military infrastructure, which included the expansion of the Army and Navy, as well as improvements in the nation's defensive capabilities. Madison also turned his attention to economic recovery. The war had disrupted trade, caused inflation, and led to the accumulation of national debt. In response to these economic challenges, Madison supported the rechartering of the First Bank of the United States, which had been dissolved in 1811 due to political opposition. The re-establishment of a national bank was seen as a necessary step in stabilizing the currency, managing the country's debt, and ensuring economic growth. While Madison had once been wary of centralized financial power, the experience of the war had convinced him that a strong central financial institution was essential for the country's long-term prosperity. The period following the war also saw significant improvements in the nation's infrastructure. Madison, along with his successor James Monroe, supported internal improvements such as the construction of roads, canals, and other transportation networks. These efforts were designed to connect the growing population of the United States and promote economic development. The most significant of these projects was the construction of the National Road, which stretched from Maryland to Illinois and facilitated the movement of people and goods across the western frontier. Despite these efforts to strengthen the nation's infrastructure, Madison faced continued opposition from those who believed that the federal government should not play a significant role in the internal improvements. Madison, who had long been a proponent of limited government, was torn between his belief in states' rights and the practical need for federal involvement in building a unified national infrastructure. This tension between federal and state authority would remain a defining issue in American politics for many years to come. Another challenge Madison faced in the post-war years was the growing issue of slavery. The institution of slavery, which had been a divisive issue since the nation's founding, became even more contentious in the wake of the War of 1812. The expansion of the United States into new territories, particularly in the West, raised questions about whether slavery would be allowed to spread into these areas. The debate over slavery would eventually lead to the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which sought to maintain the balance between free and slave states in the Union. Madison, who had been a slaveholder himself, was deeply conflicted over the issue, recognizing the moral and political challenges it presented. The period after the War of 1812 also marked a shift in American foreign policy. With the war behind them, the United States sought to assert its influence in the Western Hemisphere. One of the most significant foreign policy developments during Madison's presidency was his support for the Monroe Doctrine, which was articulated by President James Monroe in 1823. The Monroe Doctrine declared that the Western Hemisphere was closed to further European colonization, and that any attempts by European powers to interfere in the Americas would be seen as an act of aggression against the United States. Madison, although no longer in office when the Monroe Doctrine was officially declared, had played a key role in shaping the United States' approach to foreign policy. The Monroe Doctrine would become a cornerstone of American foreign policy, reflecting the nation's growing sense of independence and its determination to protect its interests in the Western Hemisphere. Despite the optimism of the post-war years, Madison's final years in office were marked by increasing political division. The political landscape was shifting, and the Democratic-Republican Party, which had dominated American politics since the nation's founding, was beginning to fragment. The era of the so-called Virginia dynasty, in which Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and James Monroe had held the presidency, was drawing to a close. Madison's own political influence began to wane as new generations of political leaders, such as John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson, began to rise to prominence. As Madison's presidency came to an end in 1817, the United States found itself at a crossroads. The nation had survived the challenges of the War of 1812, and its post-war recovery had laid the groundwork for future prosperity. Yet the country remained deeply divided over issues such as slavery, states' rights, and the role of the federal government. The challenges Madison faced during his presidency would continue to shape the course of American history long after he left office. In the years following the War of 1812, the United States began to assert itself more confidently on the world stage. The war had been a defining moment in the nation's history, and with the conclusion of the conflict, the United States was poised to establish its place in the global order. As President James Monroe assumed office in 1817, he recognized the need for a clear foreign policy that would not only protect American interests but also define the nation's role in the Western Hemisphere. It was during this time that the Monroe Doctrine was introduced, a policy that would become one of the cornerstones of American foreign policy for generations to come. Though Madison was no longer president when the Monroe Doctrine was officially articulated in 1823, his influence was felt in its creation. Madison's presidency had been marked by a series of diplomatic successes, and his support for a more assertive national policy in the Western Hemisphere had laid the groundwork for the Monroe Doctrine's eventual formulation. The United States had emerged from the War of 1812 with a new sense of pride and purpose, and Monroe's administration was determined to protect the nation's interests and ensure that the Western Hemisphere remained free from European interference. The Monroe Doctrine, declared by President Monroe in his annual address to Congress, stated that the Western Hemisphere was closed to further European colonization, and that any attempts by European powers to interfere in the Americas would be considered acts of aggression against the United States. The doctrine was, in essence, a declaration of the United States' intention to exert its influence over the Americas, ensuring that European powers would no longer be able to dominate the region, as they had done during the colonial era. The Monroe Doctrine was a bold statement of American policy, and it reflected the nation's growing sense of independence and confidence. At its core, the doctrine was designed to protect the young republic from the influence of European powers, particularly in Latin America, where several countries were in the midst of gaining their independence from Spain. Monroe's policy was intended to send a clear message to European nations that the Western Hemisphere was no longer a place for further colonization or interference. While the Monroe Doctrine was not immediately enforced by military means, its impact was profound. It marked the beginning of a new era in American foreign policy, one that emphasized the protection of American sovereignty and the maintenance of peace in the Western Hemisphere. The doctrine was also a reflection of the growing sense of nationalism that characterized the post-war of 1812 period. As the United States emerged as a more confident nation, it sought to define its role in the world and assert its influence over the Americas. In the years that followed the Monroe Doctrine's declaration, the United States would continue to expand its influence in the Western Hemisphere. The doctrine helped shape the nation's foreign policy decisions, particularly in Latin America, where the United States began to take a more active interest in the political affairs of the region. In the decades following Monroe's presidency, the Monroe Doctrine would be invoked several times to justify American intervention in Latin American conflicts and to prevent European powers from reasserting their influence in the region. Despite its significance, the Monroe Doctrine was not without its critics. Some argued that the United States was overstepping its bounds and attempting to impose its will on other nations. Others believed that the doctrine was overly ambitious, and that the United States did not have the military or economic power to back up its claims. Still, the Monroe Doctrine was a pivotal moment in the development of American foreign policy, and its influence would resonate for many years to come. The Monroe Doctrine was not just about protecting American interests, it also reflected a broader vision of American exceptionalism. The doctrine was rooted in the belief that the United States had a unique mission in the world, one that was tied to the ideals of liberty and democracy. In many ways, the Monroe Doctrine was a statement of American self-confidence, a declaration that the United States was no longer just a fledgling republic, but a nation with a role to play in the shaping of world events. Madison's influence on the Monroe Doctrine was felt not only through his contributions to the early foreign policy of the United States, but also through his broader vision for the nation. Madison had long believed in the importance of a strong independent republic, one that was capable of asserting its rights and protecting its interests. The Monroe Doctrine in many ways reflected these ideals, asserting the United States' right to safeguard its sovereignty and its place in the Western Hemisphere. As the United States moved further into the 19th century, the Monroe Doctrine would continue to shape the country's foreign policy. It was invoked during times of crisis, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and it remained a central element of American foreign policy for much of the 19th and 20th centuries. The doctrine's emphasis on protecting the Western Hemisphere from European influence became a key aspect of the United States' global strategy. While the Monroe Doctrine was a significant development in the history of American foreign policy, it was also a reflection of the changing nature of international relations in the post-Napoleonic era. As the United States emerged as a more confident and powerful nation, it was determined to protect its interests and assert its influence in the Americas. The Monroe Doctrine was a key moment in this process, helping to define the United States as a nation that was both independent and proactive in its foreign relations. After leaving the presidency in 1817, James Madison returned to his beloved Montpelier, the plantation estate in Virginia that had been his home for most of his life. Having shaped the early years of the American Republic and played pivotal roles in its formation, Madison's departure from public office was not just the end of his political career, but a return to the quiet life he had longed for during his years of public service. Though no longer directly involved in the day-to-day operations of government, Madison's influence on the nation would continue to be felt, particularly through his role as a respected elder statesman. Madison's retirement to Montpelier was marked by a period of reflection. His health, which had always been fragile, had begun to decline, but he remained mentally active. His time at Montpelier was spent in contemplation of the nation he had helped to build and the challenges it would face in the coming years. Though he no longer had a direct hand in the crafting of policy, his thoughts on government, liberty, and the American Republic continued to resonate within the political circles of the day. During his retirement, Madison focused much of his attention on the intellectual and philosophical matters that had driven his early life. He spent time reading and writing, continuing to refine his thoughts on Republican government and the principles of liberty that had guided his earlier work. He was especially interested in the idea of republicanism, the belief in a government that is based on the consent of the governed, with power derived from the people rather than from a monarchy or aristocracy. This vision of government had shaped his contributions to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and it remained central to his understanding of the American experiment. Though Madison was no longer actively involved in politics, he remained deeply concerned with the direction the nation was taking. The growing division between the North and the South, particularly over the issue of slavery, was a source of concern for Madison. He had long been conflicted about the institution of slavery, which he had inherited as part of his upbringing and his property at Montpelier. While he had long been an advocate for gradual emancipation and had supported efforts to end the international slave trade, he was deeply troubled by the persistence of slavery in the South. His personal views on the matter remained complex, as he believed that slavery was anathema to the principles of liberty and republicanism, yet he struggled with how to address the issue politically. Madison's retirement was also marked by his ongoing correspondence with former colleagues and political allies. He maintained a close friendship with Thomas Jefferson, and the two men exchanged letters on a wide range of subjects, including the state of the nation, the Constitution, and the challenges facing the United States. Their correspondence, which has since become an important historical record, reveals Madison's continued commitment to the principles of Republican government, even as he grappled with the political realities of his time. Though Madison was no longer at the forefront of national politics, he remained an important figure in the intellectual life of the nation. He was frequently consulted by younger politicians who sought his advice on matters of government and constitutional interpretation. Madison's reputation as the father of the Constitution ensured that his views continued to carry weight, and his influence was felt in the debates over the future of the Republic. In addition to his intellectual pursuits, Madison also focused on the management of Montpellier, his estate. Though his health was fragile and his political activities were limited, he took great pride in the cultivation of the land and the ongoing development of his estate. Montpellier, which had been his home for much of his life, remained a symbol of his connection to the land and his roots in Virginia. In these final years of his life, Madison also had the opportunity to reflect on the legacy he had created. He had been instrumental in shaping the government of the United States, from his role in the drafting of the Constitution to his service as the fourth president. His work on the Bill of Rights, his leadership in the formation of the federal government, and his advocacy for the principles of republicanism had left an indelible mark on the nation. As he reflected on his legacy, Madison was aware of the challenges that lay ahead for the country. The nation was still young and still grappling with questions of identity, governance, and the role of the federal government. The tensions between the North and South, particularly over the issue of slavery, would eventually lead to the Civil War, a conflict that would test the very foundations of the republic he had helped to create. While Madison could not have foreseen the challenges that would arise in the coming decades, he remained confident that the principles of liberty and self-government would endure. Madison's time at Montpellier was a quiet and introspective period of his life, marked by reflection on the nation he had helped to build and the future that lay ahead. His retirement was not the end of his influence on the political landscape of the United States, but rather a time for him to reflect on the ideals that had guided him throughout his life. It was a fitting conclusion to a career defined by service to his country and his unwavering commitment to the principles of Republican government. As the years passed and James Madison lived out his retirement at Montpellier, he often turned his thoughts to the enduring legacy of the Constitution, a document he had been instrumental in drafting and defending. By the time of his later years, the United States had grown substantially. The country had expanded its borders, experienced moments of national unity and discord, and begun to define its place on the world stage. Yet amidst these changes, Madison's foundational work remained at the heart of the American experiment in self-government. Madison's thoughts on the Constitution remained deeply intertwined with his commitment to the principles of republicanism, the belief that power should be derived from the people, and that a well-constructed government could protect the liberties of individuals while preserving the public good. These principles had guided his work at the Constitutional Convention in 1787 and throughout his political career, and they were the foundation of his most enduring legacy. The Constitution, in Madison's eyes, was not a perfect document, but rather one that had been carefully designed to balance the competing interests of the states and the federal government, as well as to safeguard individual rights. Madison's own contributions, his drafting of the Virginia Plan, his advocacy for the Bill of Rights, and his role in securing the ratification of the Constitution were central to the shaping of the document. He saw the Constitution as a framework for governance that could adapt to changing circumstances while upholding the core principles of liberty and justice. In his reflections, Madison often expressed a sense of satisfaction that the Constitution had endured as the supreme law of the land. The fact that the United States had survived the challenges of the early years and had not descended into anarchy or monarchy, as many had feared, was, in Madison's mind, a testament to the strength and wisdom of the system he had helped create. The separation of powers, the system of checks and balances, and the protection of individual rights through the Bill of Rights were all features of the Constitution that Madison believed would safeguard the Republic for generations to come. However, Madison was not blind to the challenges that the Constitution faced in the years after its adoption. He was keenly aware of the tensions that existed between the federal government and the states, as well as the continuing debates over the role of the federal government in regulating slavery, commerce, and internal improvements. Madison had always been a staunch advocate of limited government, and he had believed that the federal government's powers should be carefully defined and restrained. Yet, as the nation grew and faced new challenges, the balance between federal and state power would continue to evolve in ways that Madison had not fully anticipated. One of the issues that concerned Madison in his later years was the growing sectional divide between the North and the South. Slavery, which Madison had struggled with throughout his life, remained a deeply divisive issue that would eventually lead to the Civil War. Although Madison had supported gradual emancipation and believed in the eventual extinction of slavery, he was unable to resolve the moral and political contradictions of the institution within the framework of the Constitution. The compromises made during the Constitutional Convention, such as the 3/5 Compromise and the provision for the protection of the slave trade, would come back to haunt the nation as it grew more divided over the issue of slavery. Madison also reflected on the evolution of political parties, which had developed in the early years of the Republic. Madison, who had initially been wary of political factions, had become deeply involved in the formation of the Democratic-Republican Party as a counterweight to the growing power of the Federalists. The rise of political parties, while an inevitable part of the American political system, had led to increasing polarization and partisanship. Madison had hoped that the Constitution would create a government that transcended factionalism, but he had come to realize that political parties were a natural part of democratic life. In his later years, he expressed concern about the ability of political parties to focus on the common good rather than on partisan interests. Despite these concerns, Madison remained steadfast in his belief that the Constitution was the foundation of American democracy. He believed that, as long as the fundamental principles of the Constitution were upheld, principles such as the separation of powers, the protection of individual rights, and the rule of law, the nation would continue to thrive. Madison's faith in the Constitution was a faith in the resilience of the American people, who, he believed, would continue to uphold the values of liberty and self-government. Madison's reflections on the Constitution in his later years were not just a contemplation of his own legacy, but also an expression of his deep commitment to the nation's future. He understood that the Constitution was a living document, one that would evolve and adapt to the changing needs of the nation. The Constitution, in Madison's view, was not simply a historical artifact, but a dynamic system of government that could address the challenges of the present while preserving the ideals of the American Revolution. As Madison neared the end of his life, he saw his contributions to the Constitution as part of a larger effort to create a republic that would endure through the centuries. He had helped to create a government that was grounded in the principles of liberty, justice, and equality, principles that would continue to shape the course of American history. While Madison knew that the United States faced many challenges in the years to come, he was confident that the Constitution would remain the cornerstone of the nation's political system. James Madison's final years were marked by a quiet reflection on a life spent in service to the United States. After retiring to Montpelier in 1817, he lived for nearly 2 more decades, witnessing both the continued growth of the nation and the rise of new political challenges. Though his health had been fragile for much of his life, his intellectual vigor remained sharp, and his influence continued to be felt through his correspondence and his legacy as a central architect of the American Republic. In the early years of his retirement, Madison took solace in his studies, the management of Montpelier, and his correspondence with close friends and political allies, most notably Thomas Jefferson. The two men, having been integral partners in the shaping of the nation's foundation, maintained a deep and enduring friendship. Their letters offer a window into the concerns they shared, particularly regarding the direction the nation was headed. Despite their differences in political views over the years, both men were deeply committed to the principles of liberty and self-government that had been the driving force behind the American Revolution and the establishment of the Constitution. Madison's later years also saw the development of new challenges in the United States, challenges that he had foreseen but could not prevent. As sectional tensions between the North and South grew, particularly over the issue of slavery, Madison's own complex relationship with slavery came into sharper focus. Though he had freed some of his slaves in his will, Madison continued to own enslaved people throughout his life, a contradiction that has drawn significant scrutiny from historians. He had long believed in gradual emancipation but was constrained by the political realities of his time, particularly the necessity of maintaining the fragile union between the North and South. Despite the moral complexity of his position, Madison's thoughts on slavery and the rights of man were integral to his broader vision for the nation. His belief in liberty and republican government was fundamental to his understanding of the United States mission. Yet his inability to resolve the issue of slavery within the Constitution haunted him. This issue would continue to shape the nation for years after his death, culminating in the Civil War. In his final years, Madison also reflected on the broader historical trajectory of the United States. The young republic had faced numerous challenges since its founding, and Madison had played a central role in each of those pivotal moments. From the drafting of the Constitution to his presidency, his contributions to American political thought were unparalleled. Yet, as the nation expanded, Madison saw the increasing complexity of the Union. The nation's continued growth, particularly with the addition of new states and territories, meant that the original principles of the Constitution would continue to be tested. Madison believed, however, that the Constitution was a framework that could withstand these challenges, provided that the people remained committed to its ideals. Madison's final years were not marked by the active political involvement that characterized his earlier life, but rather by a quiet acceptance of the world he'd helped shape. His legacy, however, remained secure. By the time of his death on June 28, 1836, at the age of 85, Madison had seen the United States grow from a fragile union of 13 states into a nation of considerable power and influence. His contributions to the founding of the nation, particularly his central role in drafting the Constitution and his advocacy for a Bill of Rights, had made him one of the most important figures in American history. Madison's passing was mourned across the nation, but his legacy lived on in the very government he had helped create. The Constitution, with its system of checks and balances, its division of powers, and its protection of individual rights, continued to guide the United States through the challenges of the 19th and 20th centuries. Madison's vision for a republic based on the rule of law, the separation of powers, and the protection of individual liberties endured long after his death. Though Madison had quietly withdrawn from the public eye in his final years, his influence continued to shape the political landscape of the United States. He had been a key architect of the American experiment, a man who had shaped the course of history with his intellect, his foresight, and his unwavering commitment to the ideals of liberty and self-government. In the years following his death, his contributions to the nation would be recognized as fundamental to the survival and success of the American Republic. James Madison's final resting place is at Montpelier, the home he had built with his own hands and the estate where he'd spent his final years in quiet reflection. Though he is no longer with us, his legacy endures in the principles of government he helped establish, in the enduring framework of the Constitution, and in the republic he helped to shape. James Madison's contributions to the United States extend far beyond his years in office, and his legacy remains intertwined with the very identity of the nation he helped create. Known as the father of the Constitution, Madison's intellectual vision, political acumen, and enduring commitment to the principles of republican government have shaped the United States in ways that continue to resonate to this day. At the core of Madison's legacy lies the Constitution, the blueprint for the American government. His role in its creation, particularly his leadership at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, ensured that the framework for governance would be grounded in democratic principles, separation of powers, and checks and balances. Madison's central idea was to prevent any one branch of government from gaining too much power, thus safeguarding against tyranny. His belief that the structure of government itself could be a safeguard for liberty was revolutionary, and has since been a defining characteristic of the US system of governance. As one of the key authors of the Federalist Papers, Madison worked tirelessly to defend the Constitution and convince the states of its merits. His eloquent arguments in favor of a strong, unified central government were critical in securing ratification, especially in his home state of Virginia. Though the Constitution was not without its critics, Madison's persuasive writing and intellectual rigor helped to shape the national conversation, ensuring the document would be adopted. Yet Madison's legacy is not confined to the Constitution alone. His influence also extended to the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that guaranteed fundamental civil liberties. While initially hesitant about adding a Bill of Rights, Madison came to see its political necessity, and he became its principal advocate in the new Congress. The Bill of Rights, which was ratified in 1791, remains one of the most important elements of American governance, safeguarding freedoms such as speech, religion, and assembly, and providing the foundation for the nation's commitment to individual liberty. Throughout his life, Madison remained steadfast in his belief in the importance of a government that is accountable to the people. His vision of a republic that balanced individual freedoms with a common good has continued to inform American political thought. Madison's enduring influence can be seen not only in the framework of the Constitution, but also in the way that Americans view their government, an institution created not by a monarchy or aristocracy, but by the will of the people, with structures designed to preserve liberty and justice. Madison's political philosophy also had a profound impact on the development of political parties in the United States. Although he had initially been wary of the rise of factions, he eventually came to play a pivotal role in the formation of the Democratic-Republican Party, which sought to counterbalance the growing influence of the Federalists. Madison's party championed the rights of states and advocated for a limited federal government. Though political parties have since become a fundamental part of American democracy, Madison's early concerns about factionalism and his efforts to protect the Republic from the dangers of partisanship remain relevant in modern political discourse. Madison's legacy also encompasses his commitment to protecting the United States from foreign influence. His presidency, marked by the War of 1812, was a time when the nation faced its first major military test after the Revolutionary War. Although the war was fraught with challenges, Madison's determination to defend American sovereignty and assert the nation's independence in the face of British aggression ultimately solidified his legacy as a president who fought to preserve the Republic's autonomy. Even after leaving office, Madison's influence continued. His years of retirement at Montpellier allowed him the opportunity to reflect on his work and its impact. His correspondence with Thomas Jefferson and other key figures of the time offers insights into his thoughts on the future of the nation, including his concerns about slavery, which continued to divide the country. Madison's recognition of the moral and political dilemma posed by slavery was one of the many ways his legacy remains intertwined with the ongoing struggle for freedom and equality in America. Madison's intellectual contributions were not confined to his political work. He was a thinker and a writer who believed deeply in the power of reason and philosophy to guide public policy. His political philosophy, rooted in the study of Enlightenment thinkers such as John Locke, Montesquieu, and Rousseau, sought to create a system of government that balanced competing interests while preserving individual liberty. His work laid the groundwork for the American experiment in democracy, one that continues to evolve but remains grounded in the ideals he helped establish. In the years after Madison's death in 1836, his legacy continued to shape the American political landscape. His contributions to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights have ensured his place as one of the most important figures in American history. The framework he helped create has endured for more than 2 centuries, serving as the foundation for a government that is still evolving but remains committed to the principles of liberty, justice, and the protection of individual rights. Today, Madison's legacy is celebrated not only in the United States, but also around the world, as the principles of Republican government and individual liberty he championed have influenced democracies across the globe. As the United States continues to face new challenges, the Constitution remains Madison's most enduring contribution, a document that has shaped the nation's identity and continues to guide its path. James Madison's life and legacy are a testament to the power of ideas and the enduring strength of a government founded on the principles of liberty, justice, and the rule of law. Through his intellectual vision and his tireless dedication to the cause of republicanism, Madison helped shape a nation that would go on to become a beacon of freedom and democracy for the world. James Madison's political philosophy was rooted in his belief in the principles of republicanism, the idea that a government should derive its authority from the consent of the governed and work to safeguard individual liberties while promoting the common good. These ideas were fundamental to Madison's thinking from his early years at Princeton, through his involvement in the creation of the U.S. Constitution and his years as president. His contributions to American political thought went beyond mere governance. They were a reflection of his belief in a government that was measured, thoughtful, and restrained. Madison's early intellectual influences were deeply shaped by Enlightenment thinkers, particularly those who emphasized the importance of natural rights and the social contract. John Locke's ideas on government and liberty were central to Madison's worldview. Locke's argument that individuals had inherent rights to life, liberty, and property formed the foundation of Madison's political thought, and these principles were integral to his conception of government as a protector of individual freedoms. Madison also drew from Montesquieu's theories of the separation of powers, believing that the structure of government must be carefully designed to prevent any single branch from becoming too powerful. Madison's understanding of human nature, tempered by his belief in reason and balance, led him to advocate for a system of checks and balances as a safeguard against tyranny. One of Madison's most important intellectual contributions was his understanding of the nature of factions. He recognized that human societies are inherently divided by interests, and that these factions, groups united by a common interest or passion, could pose a threat to the public good. In his famous essay, Federalist Number 10, Madison argued that a large republic with a diversity of interests and competing factions would be the best defense against the rise of any single faction that could dominate and infringe upon the rights of others. His solution to the problem of factions was a government that could moderate the effects of these divisions through representation and the protection of minority rights, a vision that was embodied in the U.S. Constitution. Madison's commitment to protecting individual rights was also evident in his advocacy for a Bill of Rights. Though he initially believed that the Constitution, as written, sufficiently protected liberty, he came to recognize the political necessity of explicitly enumerating certain rights. The first 10 amendments, known as the Bill of Rights, ensured the protection of key freedoms, including speech, religion, and the press, and provided legal safeguards against government overreach. The Bill of Rights became Madison's most enduring contribution to the protection of individual liberties, securing a fundamental framework for the rights of citizens in the new republic. Madison's belief in limited government was another central tenet of his political philosophy. He was a firm advocate of the separation of powers, believing that the federal government should be strong enough to provide stability and security, but not so powerful as to infringe on the rights of the states or the people. This was evident in his role in drafting the Constitution, where he worked to balance the need for a central authority with the rights of the states. Madison's vision of a republic was one where power was divided between the branches of government and between the federal and state governments, creating a system of governance that could check its own power and protect individual freedoms. Yet Madison's commitment to limited government did not mean that he was opposed to all forms of federal power. Over the course of his life, he recognized the necessity of certain centralized institutions, such as a national bank, to ensure the economic stability of the nation. While he initially opposed the creation of the Bank of the United States under Alexander Hamilton, Madison's thinking evolved over time, and he came to see the importance of a strong central financial system. This shift reflected his broader pragmatic approach to governance, where the protection of the nation's long-term interests sometimes required compromise. Madison also grappled with the issue of slavery throughout his life, and his views on the institution were informed by the political realities of his time. Although he believed slavery was incompatible with the principles of liberty upon which the nation was founded, he was reluctant to take bold action against it, particularly because of the political consequences it might have on the unity of the states. Madison's contradictions regarding slavery, his role as a slave owner, his advocacy for gradual emancipation, and his failure to address the issue more decisively, have made his legacy on this issue more complex. However, his reflections on slavery and his concern about the moral and political challenges it posed remain central to the conversation about his broader political philosophy. In his later years, Madison's reflections on the Constitution and the nation's direction revealed a deep commitment to the republic he had helped to create. He believed that the Constitution was a living document that could evolve over time, but he also worried about the growing political divisions within the country. The rise of political parties, while a natural development, had led to increasing polarization, which Madison feared could undermine the unity of the nation. He is particularly concerned about the potential for the federal government to become too powerful, which he saw as a threat to the very principles of republicanism that had inspired the American Revolution. Madison's political philosophy, though shaped by his intellectual education, was also shaped by his experiences in government. His time as a legislator, his role in the drafting of the Constitution, and his presidency all influenced his thinking on the proper role of government. Though Madison had a deep belief in the power of ideas and the importance of intellectual reasoning, he was also a pragmatist who understood the complexities and compromises that were often required in political life. Ultimately, James Madison's political philosophy was a reflection of his lifelong commitment to the principles of liberty, justice, and the protection of individual rights. His legacy as a political thinker, constitutional architect, and advocate for Republican government has shaped the United States in profound ways. Madison's work, from the drafting of the Constitution to his defense of the Bill of Rights, continues to provide the foundation for American democracy, ensuring that the nation remains grounded in the principles that Madison so deeply believed in. As the United States grew and matured in the years following the Constitution's ratification, the political landscape of the young nation began to evolve in ways that James Madison had not fully anticipated. In the early days of the Republic, Madison had hoped that the structure of government outlined in the Constitution would minimize factionalism, encouraging rational debate and cooperation among citizens who were committed to the common good. However, by the 1790s it became clear that political factions, or political parties, were an inevitable part of American democracy. Madison's relationship with political parties was complex. In the beginning, he was deeply wary of them, seeing them as a threat to the unity and stability of the Republic. He believed that factions, driven by personal ambition or sectional interests, could undermine the nation's commitment to the public good. Madison's initial resistance to the formation of parties is evident in his writings and his participation in the early years of the Republic, as he worked alongside Thomas Jefferson to create a government that would protect the common welfare. However, the increasing polarization of American politics, particularly during the presidency of George Washington, led to the rise of two dominant political factions: the Federalists, led by Alexander Hamilton, and the Democratic Republicans, led by Madison and Jefferson. These two factions represented differing visions of the future of the United States. The Federalists, who favored a strong central government, a national bank, and close ties with Britain, were contrasted by the Democratic Republicans, who advocated for limited government, states' rights, and an agrarian-based economy. Madison's involvement in the creation of the Democratic Republican Party was a natural outgrowth of his political philosophy and his disagreements with Hamilton's policies. The Federalist vision of a strong central government was, to Madison, anathema to the principles of republicanism that he had worked so hard to establish. Hamilton's financial system, particularly his push for a national bank, was seen by Madison as a consolidation of power that would undermine the sovereignty of the states and potentially lead to tyranny. Thus, Madison became a vocal critic of Hamilton and his policies, especially as they expanded the role of the federal government at the expense of states' rights. Despite his misgivings about the rise of political factions, Madison recognized that the formation of parties was the inevitable result of the differing visions of government that existed within the nation. Over time, he and Jefferson organized their supporters into the Democratic Republican Party, positioning it as an alternative to the Federalists. The Democratic Republicans championed agrarian interests, opposed the national bank, and favored a decentralized government that would grant more power to the states. The emergence of these political factions had profound implications for Madison's political career. As the leader of the Democratic Republican Party, Madison found himself engaged in an increasingly intense and partisan political battle with the Federalists. The Federalists, under Hamilton's leadership, sought to strengthen the central government and expand the power of the executive branch, while the Democratic Republicans, led by Madison and Jefferson, pushed back against these efforts, advocating for a government that was more restrained and responsive to the will of the people. Madison's political philosophy, which had been shaped by his concerns over the concentration of power, was evident in his opposition to Hamilton's policies. He believed that the creation of a national bank, the federal assumption of state debts, and the expansion of federal power through internal improvements were all steps toward consolidating power in the hands of a few, undermining the principles of republicanism that he and Jefferson had championed. Madison was particularly concerned with the idea of a national bank, viewing it as an unconstitutional expansion of federal power. In his mind, the bank would not only grant too much financial power to the federal government, but also place too much control over the nation's economy in the hands of private bankers. As Madison and Jefferson rallied their supporters against the Federalists, the political divide in the country deepened. The election of 1800, in which Jefferson defeated incumbent President John Adams, marked a decisive moment in American political history. It was a victory for the Democratic Republicans and a repudiation of Federalist policies. The peaceful transition of power from one political party to another, without violence or upheaval, demonstrated the resilience of the American democratic system and established a precedent for future elections. Though Madison's political party emerged victorious in 1800, the rise of political factions presented challenges that Madison had not foreseen. The political system that Madison had helped create was now being shaped by partisan battles that threatened to divide the nation. The partisan rancor that characterized American politics in the 1790s and early 1800s would continue to shape the course of the Republic for decades to come. Madison, while deeply committed to the principles of republicanism, recognized that the rise of political parties was a natural and inevitable feature of American democracy. Madison's reflections on the rise of political parties reveal a deep ambivalence. On the one hand, he understood that political parties could serve as a vital check on government power, providing a mechanism for organizing differing viewpoints and ensuring that the government remained responsive to the people. On the other hand, he feared that parties could foster division and lead to the kind of factionalism that might threaten the unity of the nation. Madison's thoughts on political parties are a reminder that, while they are a necessary part of democratic life, they also present inherent dangers that must be managed carefully to preserve the republic. As Madison's political career came to an end and he withdrew from the public eye, the political system he had helped create continued to evolve. The rise of political parties, despite Madison's reservations, became a defining feature of American democracy, and the battles between factions would shape the political landscape for generations to come. James Madison's contributions to the United States, particularly his role in drafting the Constitution, were rooted in a vision of government that balanced power in such a way that would prevent the rise of tyranny while safeguarding individuals' liberties. His vision for the United States was one of a balanced republic, a system of governance that would allow for a strong central government, but one that was accountable to the people and constrained by a series of checks and balances. At the heart of Madison's political thought was a deep understanding of human nature. He recognized that people, by their very nature, were self-interested, and that any system of government had to take this into account. Madison believed that the key to a stable republic was not to remove or repress these self-interests, but to design a system of government that would harness them and channel them in a way that benefited the public good. His solution was the creation of a government that was divided into different branches, each with its own powers and each capable of checking the powers of the others. This idea of separation of powers became a cornerstone of the US Constitution. Madison, having been heavily influenced by Montesquieu's work The Spirit of the Laws, was convinced that dividing the powers of government into distinct branches, executive, legislative, and judicial, would prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. He saw the branches as inherently competitive, each one working to safeguard its own interests, but in doing so balancing the power of the others. This system of checks and balances would, in Madison's view, provide stability and ensure that no faction, no matter how powerful, could dominate the others. Madison's belief in checks and balances was not limited to the branches of government, but also extended to the relationship between the federal government and the states. The Constitution, as drafted by Madison, established a federal system that allowed for the existence of state governments with their own powers, separate from those of the federal government. This was an essential feature of Madison's vision of a balanced republic, one where both the central government and the states had their roles to play, and neither could undermine the other. This idea of federalism was grounded in Madison's belief that government must always be responsive to the people. He understood that a government that was too centralized would be distant from the people it was meant to serve, while a government that was too decentralized would lack the authority and resources to maintain order and protect the nation's interests. By balancing the powers of the federal government with those of the states, Madison believed that the United States could have a government that was both strong and responsive, one that would be capable of addressing the challenges of the future, without threatening the liberties of the people. Another key aspect of Madison's vision was the protection of individual rights. Though he initially hesitated to include a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, Madison eventually became one of its strongest advocates, understanding that the explicit protection of certain rights was necessary to reassure those who feared that the new government might infringe upon the liberties of its citizens. The Bill of Rights, ratified in 1791, ensured that fundamental freedoms such as freedom of speech, religion, and the press would be safeguarded against government overreach. Madison's vision for the Republic was also grounded in his commitment to the principles of democracy. However, Unlike many of his contemporaries, Madison was not an advocate for direct democracy. He believed that the passions of the people, if left unchecked, could lead to instability and even tyranny by the majority. His solution was the creation of a representative democracy, where elected officials would act as a filter for the public will, making decisions based on reason and the common good rather than on the fleeting passions of the masses. Madison's belief in the importance of a representative democracy was evident in his design for the federal system. The Constitution established a system of elected representatives in the House of Representatives, who would serve as the direct voice of the people, and a Senate, where senators would be chosen by state legislatures and serve longer terms. This system was designed to ensure that the government would remain accountable to the people, while also providing the stability and reasoned decision-making that a republic required. Perhaps one of Madison's most significant and lasting contributions to the republic was his understanding of the dangers posed by factions. In Federalist Number 10, Madison famously argued that factions, while inevitable in any society, could be controlled through the structure of a large republic. He believed that in a large republic, where many different interests and factions existed, it would be much harder for any one group to dominate the political system. A large, diverse republic would encourage compromise and moderation, as no single faction would be able to impose its will on the others. This vision of a republic, where factions competed for power but none could dominate the others, was central to Madison's thinking and became a defining feature of American democracy. Madison's vision of a balanced republic, one where power was separated, divided, and balanced, would become the foundation of the United States government. His contributions to the drafting of the Constitution, his defense of the document in the Federalist Papers, and his role in the creation of the Bill of Rights all reflect his deep commitment to the principles of republicanism, liberty, and justice. The United States, as it has grown and evolved, has faced many challenges, political, social, and economic, but the structure of government that Madison helped to create has remained remarkably resilient. His belief in a balanced government, one that accounts for human nature and the need for checks on power, continues to guide the nation today. James Madison's influence on the future of the United States cannot be overstated. As the father of the Constitution, his intellectual and political contributions shaped the foundation of the American government. Madison's work at the Constitutional Convention, his defense of the Constitution through the Federalist Papers, and his later role as president left a legacy that would echo throughout the nation's history. His ideas on the separation of powers, federalism, and the protection of individual rights would guide the country through its most formative years and continue to inform American political thought in the centuries to come. Madison's understanding of the nature of government, particularly the balance between liberty and order, was central to his thinking and to the structure of the United States Constitution. His belief that the powers of government should be divided and balanced was revolutionary, ensuring that no branch of government or faction could dominate the political system. This vision created a government designed to resist the concentration of power and protect individual freedoms, and it has provided a model for other democratic nations throughout history. Madison's influence is perhaps most evident in the enduring strength and flexibility of the Constitution. His intellectual rigor and philosophical commitment to republicanism laid the groundwork for the United States system of government, one that has lasted for more than 2 centuries. The Constitution, as Madison envisioned it, is not a static document but a living framework that can adapt to the needs and challenges of future generations. It has been amended and interpreted in countless ways over the years, but the principles Madison championed, such as the separation of powers, the protection of individual rights, and the promotion of the common good, remain at the heart of the American political system. One of the most important aspects of Madison's legacy is his belief in the power of ideas to shape the future. His understanding of government as a reflection of human nature with all its imperfections and contradictions, influenced how future generations would approach questions of governance, liberty, and justice. Madison's writings, particularly the Federalist Papers, continue to be a vital resource for students, politicians, and legal scholars who seek to understand the principles underlying the American system of government. Madison's defense of the Constitution in the Federalist Papers remains a central text in the study of American political thought. The essays, written in collaboration with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, outlined the rationale behind the Constitution and addressed the concerns of those who feared that the new government would infringe upon the rights of the people. Madison's contributions to these essays are particularly notable for their deep understanding of human nature and his belief that a well-constructed republic could mitigate the dangers of factionalism and tyranny. These ideas continue to shape the way Americans think about their government, particularly in discussions about the balance of power between the federal government and the states, the protection of individual rights, and the preservation of democracy. Beyond his contributions to the Constitution, Madison's presidency and his actions during the War of 1812 further solidified his place in American history. His decision to go to war with Great Britain, though controversial, was ultimately seen as a necessary step in asserting American sovereignty and securing the nation's place in the world. The war, while difficult, demonstrated the resilience of the United States and its ability to defend its interests on the global stage. Madison's leadership during the conflict helped to define the role of the president as a defender of the nation's security and independence. Madison's post-presidential years were marked by his reflection on the Constitution and the future of the United States. In his later years, Madison became more concerned with the growing sectional divide over issues like slavery and the expansion of the nation. Though he had been a vocal advocate for gradual emancipation, Madison's views on slavery were complicated by his personal ties to the institution. His legacy on the issue of slavery remains one of the most difficult aspects of his career. However, his contributions to the broader principles of liberty and human rights continue to be a touchstone for future generations. Madison's influence on American political thought can also be seen in the way his ideas shaped the development of political parties. Although he had initially been wary of factions, Madison's experience with the rise of political parties led him to see their inevitability in a democracy. His efforts to organize the Democratic-Republican Party as a counterbalance to the Federalists helped to shape the future of American political life, and the system of party politics that emerged during his time continues to define the country's political system today. Looking to future generations, Madison's work laid the foundation for the growth of American democracy and the protection of individual liberties. His vision of a balanced government, one that separated powers and checked the ambitions of factions, has proven to be a durable and adaptable framework for governance. As the United States expanded and faced new challenges, the principles Madison espoused were tested but endured. Madison's belief in the Republic's ability to evolve while maintaining its core values has been borne out over the years, as the United States has adapted to changing social, political, and economic conditions. Madison's legacy also continues to be felt in the ongoing debates about the role of government in society. His work provided the intellectual foundation for the growth of constitutional law and political theory in the United States. The interpretation of the Constitution, as it applies to issues like civil rights, federalism, and the role of the executive branch, continues to be shaped by the principles Madison laid out in his writings and actions. James Madison's vision for the United States was built upon the idea of a republic governed by the rule of law, with a structure designed to prevent any single branch from amassing too much power. The system of checks and balances he envisioned would allow each branch of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, to hold the others in check. Madison's system was also rooted in federalism, recognizing the need for both a strong central government and the protection of states' rights. As the nation evolved, this Madisonian system became the backbone of American governance, though its application was often challenged and adapted in response to changing circumstances. In the early years of the Republic, Madison's system of government worked largely as intended. The separation of powers and checks and balances kept the federal government from becoming tyrannical, and the Bill of Rights provided essential protections for individual freedoms. The relationship between the states and the federal government was complex but stable, as both worked together to build a new nation. However, as the United States expanded and faced new challenges, both internally and externally, the Madisonian system was put to the test. One of the earliest challenges came during Madison's presidency with the War of 1812. Though the war was ultimately a success for the United States, it highlighted several flaws in the system. The nation's military was underprepared, its economy was vulnerable, and its ability to defend itself against foreign powers was limited. The war also exposed divisions within the country, particularly between regions and political factions. Madison had advocated for a strong federal government, but the war revealed that the nation's ability to coordinate defense and maintain economic stability was still fragile. Madison's decision to go to war with Great Britain was a controversial one, and the war highlighted the complexities of Madison's system. The War of 1812, though it ended with the Treaty of Ghent, left many Americans questioning the strength and effectiveness of their government. The country had suffered military defeats, economic hardship, and political division. However, the war also provided an opportunity for the United States to assert its sovereignty and reaffirm its independence, and it helped to unite the country in the aftermath of the conflict. The challenges of the War of 1812 also exposed weaknesses in Madison's vision of a government balance between federal and state powers. While Madison had sought to limit federal power and ensure the autonomy of states, the war and its aftermath called for a more unified national response. The need for a national bank, a standing army, and a coordinated defense system became apparent, and Madison's own views on federal power evolved. This was a crucial moment in the history of American governance, as it marked a shift toward a more centralized federal system, albeit one that remained constrained by the principles of republicanism. As the United States moved into the 19th century, the challenges facing the Madisonian system continued to evolve. The rise of political parties, particularly after Madison's presidency, contributed to the system's adaptation. Madison had hoped that factions could be controlled through the Constitution, but the reality of political competition between the Federalists and Democratic Republicans led to a more polarized political environment. The increasing role of political parties in American life meant that Madison's ideal of a government that would transcend factionalism became more difficult to achieve. Political parties became an essential feature of the American system, even as they presented new challenges to the balance of power Madison had envisioned. The issue of slavery in particular exposed the limits of Madison's system. Madison, like many of his contemporaries, had been deeply conflicted about the institution of slavery. He believed it was incompatible with the principles of liberty and self-government, yet he struggled with how to address it within the framework of the Constitution. The compromises made at the Constitutional Convention, such as the 3/5 Compromise and the protection of the slave trade for 20 years, were intended to ensure the Union's survival, but they also laid the groundwork for future conflict. As the United States expanded westward and new states were added, the question of whether slavery would be allowed in these territories became a divisive issue. The failure to resolve the slavery question would eventually lead to the Civil War, challenging the very principles Madison had worked to establish. Another significant challenge to the Madisonian system came during the Jacksonian era. Andrew Jackson's presidency in the 1820s and 1830s marked a shift toward a more populist, executive-driven form of government. Jackson's use of presidential power, particularly his veto of the recharter of the Second Bank of the United States, challenged the constitutional balance Madison had envisioned. Jackson's presidency led to a more direct form of democracy, with a stronger emphasis on the will of the people, but it also raised questions about the limits of executive power and the role of the states. Despite these challenges, the Madisonian system endured. The Constitution's framework, though tested by time, was flexible enough to adapt to the changing needs of the nation. The principle of checks and balances, though at times imperfect, provided a means for the branches of government to regulate one another. Federalism, while subject to debate, remained an important part of the American political landscape, with the relationship between the federal government and the states continuing to evolve. The enduring strength of Madison's vision was evident in the fact that, even in the face of growing divisions and national crises, the American system of government was able to survive and adapt. The legacy of James Madison and his vision for the United States continues to shape the country's political system. Though the Madisonian system was not without its flaws and limitations, it provided the foundation for a government that could adapt to changing circumstances while remaining true to the principles of liberty, justice, and the rule of law. As the nation grew and faced new challenges, Madison's belief in the importance of balance, compromise, and constitutional governance continued to guide the United States through its most difficult moments. James Madison's political life was deeply intertwined with that of his close friend and longtime ally Thomas Jefferson. Together, they were key architects of the early United States, shaping both the structure of the government and the principles that would guide the nation's development. While they shared many common beliefs about the importance of republicanism, liberty, and the need for a balanced government, their political partnership was not without its tensions and differences. Their relationship, built on mutual respect and shared ideals, would profoundly influence the trajectory of American history. Madison and Jefferson's partnership began in the early 1780s, when both men were part of the Virginia political scene. Both were deeply influenced by the Enlightenment, particularly by the ideas of John Locke and Montesquieu, and shared a commitment to Republican principles. Their intellectual compatibility and shared political philosophy laid the foundation for their collaboration on a number of critical issues, including their roles in the drafting of the Constitution and the establishment of the United States democratic system. Madison's intellectual prowess and deep understanding of political theory made him a natural partner for Jefferson, whose vision for the United States was shaped by a belief in limited government and the protection of individual rights. Jefferson, who was primarily focused on the executive and legislative branches, often deferred to Madison's more detailed knowledge of constitutional law. Together, they represented a force for limited government, states' rights, and the protection of the common good. In the 1790s, as the first political factions began to emerge, Madison and Jefferson became increasingly aligned in opposition to the Federalists, who were led by Alexander Hamilton. The Federalists' advocacy for a strong central government, a national bank, and close ties with Britain clashed with Madison and Jefferson's vision of a more decentralized government, with greater power vested in the states. It was during this period that Madison and Jefferson's political partnership truly took shape, with both men working to develop the Democratic-Republican Party as a counterbalance to the Federalists. Madison, with his sharp intellect and his careful attention to the structure of government, became a key figure in shaping the party's principles. Jefferson, on the other hand, was the party's charismatic leader, advocating for the common man and pushing back against the growing influence of the Federalists. The two men's collaboration was instrumental in ensuring the success of the Democratic-Republican Party, which won the presidency in 1800 with Jefferson's election. Madison's presidency, from 1809 to 1817, was marked by the continuing influence of his relationship with Jefferson. Though their political partnership was tested by events such as the War of 1812, When Madison had to make difficult decisions about the nation's security, Madison's presidency was still informed by the principles both men had championed. The conflict with Great Britain and the economic disruptions of the war required Madison to make compromises on some of the more idealistic aspects of Jeffersonian republicanism, but his commitment to the Constitution and his vision for a limited federal government remained steadfast. While Madison and Jefferson shared a vision for the nation's future, their relationship was not without differences. For example, Madison had been initially opposed to the idea of a national bank, seeing it as an unconstitutional consolidation of power in the federal government. However, over time, Madison's views evolved, and he became more supportive of federal economic policies, including the establishment of a national bank, realizing that such institutions were necessary for the stability of the young nation. Jefferson, on the other hand, remained more skeptical of centralized financial power, preferring an agrarian-based economy and a more limited federal government. The most significant ideological rift between the two men came over the issue of slavery. Both men, though slaveholders themselves, recognized the moral contradictions between slavery and the principles of liberty and equality. Jefferson's views on slavery were marked by a desire for gradual emancipation, but he believed that this process should occur slowly. Over time, Madison likewise supported the idea of gradual emancipation, but his views on how to address slavery were more pragmatic, shaped by his concerns about maintaining the delicate balance between the North and South and preserving the Union. Despite these differences, Madison and Jefferson's friendship and political alliance remained strong throughout their careers. Their collaboration on the drafting of the Constitution and their shared vision for a republic grounded in the rule of law and the protection of individual liberties laid the foundation for the country's growth and development. Their partnership also helped define the direction of the early American Republic, particularly in its struggle to balance the ideals of liberty with the realities of governing a diverse and expanding nation. In their later years, as both men retired from public life, Madison and Jefferson remained close friends, continuing to correspond about the future of the nation and the evolving challenges it faced. Their letters, written during their retirements, offer insights into their ongoing concerns about the direction of the country and their reflections on the legacy of the Constitution and the republic they had helped create. Madison and Jefferson's political partnership is a testament to the power of collaboration in shaping the course of history. Together, they not only helped to establish the framework for the American government, but also provided the intellectual foundation for the nation's democratic ideals. Though their relationship had its differences, their shared commitment to the principles of liberty, republicanism, and constitutional governance remains a defining aspect of their legacy. By the time James Madison retired to Montpelier, the United States had emerged as a nation with its own distinct identity, yet it was still very much in the process of defining that identity in relation to the world. Madison's vision for a balanced republic, founded on the principles of liberty, justice, and the rule of law, played a significant role in shaping the national character. His intellectual and political contributions helped lay the groundwork for a government that would adapt and endure, and his leadership during pivotal moments like the drafting of the Constitution, the defense of individual rights through the Bill of Rights, and his presidency left an indelible mark on the United States. While Madison was no longer actively involved in the governance of the country after his presidency, his influence continued to resonate through the principles he had championed. The Constitution, with its intricate checks and balances, the separation of powers, and the protection of individual rights, was Madison's enduring legacy to the nation. As the nation grew and expanded, it increasingly looked to this framework to navigate the complexities of a changing world. In the years following his presidency, Madison's legacy became more clearly defined, both through his intellectual contributions and through his impact on the political landscape. He was remembered as a figure who, above all, had championed the preservation of liberty and the careful construction of a government that would safeguard the rights of the people, while ensuring that no single branch or faction could dominate the others. Madison's ideas about the importance of a strong but limited federal government were tested as the United States continued to grow. The early 19th century saw the United States expand westward, and with that expansion came new questions about the role of government and the balance of power between the federal government and the states. Madison's vision of federalism, which allowed states to retain significant power while still enabling a unified national government, continued to shape the debates over the nature of the Union. However, as the 19th century unfolded, the divisions over issues like slavery, states' rights, and the role of the federal government became more pronounced. Madison had long been conflicted about the institution of slavery, seeing it as incompatible with the principles of liberty and equality, but his failure to decisively address the issue, along with the compromises made during the drafting of the Constitution that protected slavery, meant that the question would persist and deepen, eventually leading to the Civil War. Madison's inability to reconcile the contradiction between slavery and the ideals of the Republic remains one of the most difficult aspects of his legacy. Despite this moral and political blind spot, Madison's commitment to the broader ideals of Republican government continued to guide the United States long after his death. The system he helped create was flexible enough to absorb the shocks of the 19th century, and the Constitution served as a tool for national expansion and legal evolution. His influence extended not just to the United States but to other nations around the world that sought to build democratic systems based on similar principles. Madison's vision for the country also influenced future generations of political thinkers. His work laid the intellectual foundation for debates over the nature of democracy, federalism, and the protection of civil liberties. As the United States grew and changed, the principles he had articulated, particularly his belief in the separation of powers and the protection of individual rights, became central to the ongoing development of American political theory. In the years following Madison's death, his contributions continued to shape the country's development, particularly during the Reconstruction era and the Civil War. While Madison himself had hoped for a peaceful resolution to the tensions between the North and South, the eventual outbreak of the Civil War and the subsequent abolition of slavery were the culmination of long-standing contradictions within the Republic. Despite Madison's personal contradictions on the issue of slavery, his broader commitment to republicanism and the rule of law remained central to the nation's fight for unity and equality. The end of Madison's era also marked the beginning of a new phase in the development of the United States. The nation was moving from its infancy into a more mature, complex phase of political and social development. Madison's influence, both in terms of his intellectual contributions and his role in shaping the early republic, was a touchstone for future generations. His belief in the importance of a constitutional framework that protected individual rights, balanced government power, and encouraged Republican principles continued to provide the foundation for the American political system. Madison's death in 1836 marked the end of an era in American history, but his legacy lived on in the structure and principles of the government he had helped create. His commitment to liberty, justice, and the preservation of Republican ideals helped define the United States' national identity. His contributions to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights ensured that these ideals would endure, providing a blueprint for future generations to follow. Madison's lasting influence on the United States is seen not only in the documents he helped create, but also in the ideas he espoused. The principles of limited government, the separation of powers, and the protection of individual rights remain central to the American political system. His legacy is a testament to the enduring strength of the ideas upon which the nation was founded and to the power of intellectual vision in shaping the future of a nation. James Madison's contributions to American constitutional law continue to resonate in the United States today. His ideas about government structure, the separation of powers, and the protection of individual liberties shaped not only the Constitution, but also the interpretation of that document in the centuries that followed. The lasting impact of Madison's work is evident in the way the Constitution has been adapted and expanded to address new challenges, while remaining grounded in the fundamental principles he laid out. At the heart of Madison's constitutional vision was the idea of a balanced government, one that would prevent the concentration of power in any single branch. His advocacy for the separation of powers was a direct response to the abuses of monarchy and centralized power that the American colonies had endured under British rule. Madison understood that the preservation of liberty required a government structure that would diffuse power and create a system of checks and balances. The Constitution, with its distinct separation of powers between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, was designed to ensure that no single entity could dominate the government or infringe upon the rights of the people. Madison's commitment to protecting individual rights was another cornerstone of his constitutional vision. He recognized that the government's power must be limited, and that citizens must be guaranteed fundamental rights that would protect them from tyranny. While Madison initially resisted calls for a Bill of Rights, believing that the Constitution itself provided sufficient protections, he eventually became a leading advocate for these amendments. His support for the Bill of Rights reflected his deep belief that liberty must be enshrined in law, and that government power must always be checked by the rights of the people. The Bill of Rights, which Madison helped to shape, remains one of the most important parts of the Constitution. The first 10 amendments ensure that freedoms such as speech, religion, and assembly are protected from government infringement. These rights have been foundational in the development of American constitutional law, serving as the bedrock for a wide array of legal decisions that have expanded individual freedoms over the centuries. The application of the Bill of Rights to state governments, through the doctrine of incorporation, further expanded Madison's original vision of individual protections. Madison's influence on constitutional law also extended to the broader framework of federalism, the division of powers between the national government and the states. Madison believed that a strong central government was essential for the survival of the Republic, but he also understood that states must retain significant powers to govern themselves. The balance between federal authority and states' rights has been a recurring theme in American constitutional law, and Madison's ideas about federalism have shaped debates about the scope of federal power, particularly in cases involving the regulation of commerce, civil rights, and the powers of the states. Over the years, Madison's vision of a balanced government has been tested by numerous political, legal, and social changes. The Civil War, the expansion of the federal government during the New Deal, the Civil Rights Movement, and modern debates over executive power have all raised questions about the proper role of government. Yet despite these challenges, Madison's constitutional framework has endured. The adaptability of the Constitution, its ability to address new challenges while remaining grounded in the original principles of republicanism, has allowed it to remain a living document. One of the most significant aspects of Madison's constitutional legacy is his belief in the importance of judicial review, the idea that the courts have the authority to interpret the Constitution and strike down laws that violate its principles. While judicial review was not explicitly stated in the Constitution, it was first established in the landmark case Marbury v. Madison, 1803, in which Chief Justice John Marshall asserted the power of the courts to invalidate unconstitutional laws. The principle of judicial review has since become one of the most important aspects of American constitutional law, ensuring that the Constitution remains the supreme law of the land and that the rights of individuals are protected. Madison's ideas about the role of the judiciary were informed by his belief in the importance of a balanced government. He saw the judiciary as a check on the powers of the legislative and executive branches, ensuring that the government acted within the bounds of the Constitution. In this sense, the judiciary was integral to Madison's vision of a republic where no branch could exceed its authority. Judicial review has played a crucial role in preserving the Constitution's integrity, allowing the courts to safeguard the rights and liberties that Madison and his colleagues worked so hard to protect. As the United States evolved, Madison's constitutional vision also influenced the development of American political thought. His emphasis on the importance of a written constitution, the separation of powers, and the protection of individual rights laid the foundation for constitutional scholarship and the interpretation of the document in future generations. Legal scholars, judges, and policymakers have continually looked to Madison's writings and his contributions to the framing of the Constitution as a guide for understanding the principles underlying American government. Madison's work was also instrumental in shaping the way Americans think about the relationship between the federal government and the states. His belief in a strong but limited federal government and his commitment to states' rights have continued to inform debates about the balance of power between Washington, D.C. and state capitals. Issues such as the role of the federal government in regulating commerce, protecting civil rights, and addressing economic inequality have been influenced by Madison's vision of a federal system that maintains a balance of power. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Madison's constitutional framework has continued to evolve to meet the challenges of a modern, diverse society. His ideas about the separation of powers, the protection of individual rights, and the role of the federal government remain central to debates over everything from healthcare and education to national security and environmental protection. While the nation faces new challenges, Madison's belief in a government that is accountable to the people, that respects individual freedoms, and that ensures a fair and just society remains the guiding principle of American constitutional law. As we reach the final chapter of James Madison's life, it is clear that his contributions to the United States are far-reaching and foundational. From his pivotal role in the drafting of the Constitution to his leadership as the fourth President of the United States, Madison's influence continues to be felt today, shaping the very structure of the American government and the principles that guide it. Madison's vision for a balanced republic, a system where the powers of government are carefully separated and checked, was a revolutionary idea in his time. He recognized the dangers of concentrated power and sought to create a system that would protect individual freedoms while ensuring that government could serve the needs of the people. His intellectual rigor and commitment to republicanism laid the groundwork for the structure of the United States government, and the enduring relevance of his ideas is evident in the way the Constitution has been interpreted and adapted over the centuries. Through his involvement in the creation of the Bill of Rights, Madison ensured that individual liberties would be protected from government overreach. His work to secure the adoption of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution cemented his legacy as a defender of civil rights and personal freedoms. In the years that followed, the Bill of Rights would serve as the foundation for the legal and moral framework that would protect Americans' freedoms, from the right to free speech to the protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. Madison's presidency, though often overshadowed by the larger-than-life figures of his time, proved crucial in navigating the complexities of early American governance. His handling of the War of 1812, though contentious, helped to define the young nation's foreign policy and its place in the world. The war tested the resolve of the United States, and Madison's leadership in asserting American sovereignty left a lasting mark on the nation's identity. In his later years, Madison returned to his beloved Montpelier, where he continued to reflect on the work he had done and the future of the republic he helped to build. Though his health declined, his mind remained sharp, and his correspondence with old friends like Thomas Jefferson reveals a man still deeply concerned with the future of the country. Madison's retirement was marked by a sense of quiet reflection on the principles of republicanism and liberty that had guided his life's work. As the years passed, Madison's legacy only grew in importance. The principles he helped establish in the Constitution became the bedrock of American democracy, and his work has continued to inspire legal scholars, politicians, and citizens alike. His belief in a government that would protect the rights of the people, in a republic grounded in the rule of law and the separation of powers, has remained a guiding force in American political thought. Madison's influence on the nation can also be seen in the way that political factions, while perhaps inevitable in a democracy, were given structure and purpose through the system he helped create. His work ensured that the government would be responsive to the people, yet constrained enough to avoid the dangers of tyranny. The idea of a system in which power is divided and balanced remains at the core of American governance, and Madison's thoughts on factionalism and the dangers of unchecked power continue to inform discussions on governance today. In the end, James Madison's greatest legacy is not just in the institutions he helped create, but in the enduring principles of liberty and self-government that those institutions are built upon. Madison envisioned a nation where power would be carefully divided and the rights of the people would be protected, a vision that has stood the test of time. Though the United States has changed and grown in the years since Madison's death, his influence remains deeply ingrained in the fabric of American political life. James Madison's life was one of intellectual rigor, public service, and unwavering commitment to the principles of freedom, justice, and republican government. His work continues to inspire generations of Americans, reminding us that the strength of the nation lies not only in its institutions, but in the ideals that those institutions were designed to uphold.